Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Frank sat in his recliner trying to watch the game when a cat jumped in his lap. "Get down!" he yelled and threw the cat down. It shook its head and licked its fur where Frank had touched it. This was just one of at least a dozen or so that his wife had collected over the years. Frank hated them. Carol loved those kitties, lost souls who had been abandoned or never had a home in the first place. They gave Carol a sense of purpose, a real reason to get up in the morning. If she didn't take care of them, then who would? These cats needed to be fed and loved. She really couldn't help it if cats came to her, and she definitely couldn't turn them away. When a little bag of bones ended up at her doorstep, she did her best to take care of them. She wanted all of her cats to be fat and happy. Besides, they were much better company, better than Frank was these days. While petting her new favorite cat, she thought about her first cat. Whiskers was gray with green eyes. She was a birthday present when she turned 10. Carol was an only child, so having a companion like Whiskers made her lonely life a little less lonely. Whenever Carol felt sad, she could talk to her cat. Somehow it seemed like her kitty understood what she was saying. She was a good listener. Carol could hide out in her closet with Whiskers and ignore her parents arguing. Whiskers died when Carol was 22. Seeing her cat suffer at the end of her life was unbearable. She had never felt such deep sorrow. She didn't even know it was possible to feel so sad. That's a feeling she never wanted to have again. As soon as Carol and Frank got married, she begged her husband for a kitten. It had been less than a year since Whiskers' death, and she desperately wanted another cat. Frank had always been a dog man himself, but he wanted to keep his new wife happy. He figured a little cat would be a good way to keep Carol happy while he was away at work. A decision he would come to regret. Frank thought of cats as only having one job: live in the barn and keep the vermin at bay. His grandparents' farm had a couple of cats, but they were never allowed in the house. They weren't pets. They were more like tools for catching mice. But Carol had told him countless stories of her cat and all the time they had spent together. It sounded pretty nice, and he figured it couldn't hurt to have a pet, even if it was a cat. Frank worked at his father's insurance company all his life. He eventually took over when his dad retired. Frank was easygoing and friendly, a real family man. The only problem was that there was no family. Turns out they couldn't have children. Resentment and tension made their home uncomfortable for both of them. Frank would come home from work, they would have a quiet dinner, and then he would go to work on his projects in the garage. And that's how it went for years. It wasn't great, but sometimes in life that's what you get. Carol replaced missing children with cats, lots of them. She would take in unwanted kittens from friends and put out food for the strays that would come by. In the early days, spaying and neutering animals didn't happen all that much. Feral cats ran around everywhere in her small town looking for any food they could find. They found it at Carol's house. The wild cats would just grab a quick bite and then run away. Others were a little more tame and wanted some TLC to go with their kibble. Those cats were Carol's favorites. Getting a cat to trust you and into the house was her favorite thing. That's when you knew they really loved you. There were so many cats, she started to run out of names, and many cats looked alike, but she had her favorites. Linda was her very favorite. She had gone from wild and skittish to being the biggest baby of them all. Linda meowed and pawed at Carol to pick her up. Even though Carol was always busy doing something, she always had time for Linda. When Frank was home, it was miserable for everyone. Frank thought his wife had lost her mind. When he complained about them, she would cry and say they were her children. Frank felt terrible they didn't have any human children, so he would drop it and go to the garage to escape. Frank tried to keep busy with his projects and hobbies. He worked in the garage on his wood carvings or on the car. The garage was the one room the cats were not allowed into. His only place to escape the meows and cat litter, not to mention all the bowls of cat food in the kitchen. Carol wanted to give them the good stuff, wet, stinky food, but Frank drew the line there. It cost too much for so many cats, he would say. Walking through the house to his chair, Frank would shoo the cats away. One or two would be using his chair to sleep in. As soon as he sat down, a small tabby named Cora jumped up onto his lap. "Get the hell off me!" he yelled. Frank hit the cat and she landed on the floor. Cora turned and hissed at Frank. Frank hissed back. Most of the cats knew that Frank hated them and stayed clear of them. Carol paid more attention to them than to him. He played second fiddle to a bunch of mangy animals. When Carol wasn't looking, he would kick any cat that was in his way. It made him feel a little better. He started thinking about killing the cats. At first, it was just a fantasy. Over time, he began to think more about how he would do it, how he would get away with it. Once, while she was gone to the store, Frank drowned 2 strays in the pond by putting them in a burlap sack and throwing them in. Just watching them struggle for life gave him satisfaction. Carol would wonder where they had gone and figured they had found somewhere else to get fed. Losing even a single cat was so sad for her. She would worry about them long after they were gone.
Maybe they will come back. Surely they won't find a better home somewhere else,
she would say. Frank just grinned to himself, pleased to know those scavengers would never return. Killing cats became a type of sport for Frank. He liked the thrill he got from making them disappear without getting caught. Carol didn't leave home very often, so he had to make quick work of it when he got the chance. It was convenient to blame coyotes for their disappearance. As Frank got older, the thrill of killing cats faded. Besides, new cats just replaced the dead ones as if they had never died in the first place. It felt impossible to win. Frank eventually retired after 30 years in the insurance business. In his retirement, he enjoyed fishing a little and going to garage sales with Carol. But he wanted to travel and see the world. He felt like it was time for them to go live a little. "What do you say we go on a road trip and see some of the country? We've waited for so long now, we have all the time in the world," Frank said to Carol over dinner one night.
We can't do that. Who will feed the cats?
"Maybe it's time to let them move on. Let someone else take care of them," Frank said. Carol scoffed.
That's crazy. It's not just about feeding them. They need to be cared for.
"They'll be okay. You've done enough for them. It's time for us." Carol glared at Frank. She knew he couldn't wait to get rid of them. He never cared for them like she did. She felt closer to them than to her own family. Carol got up and started clearing the table.
You just don't understand,
she said, trying to hold back the tears. "You're damn right I don't understand," Frank yelled as he followed her into the kitchen. "Why are those cats so much more important than I am? You treat those stupid cats better than you treat me." He was more angry than she had ever seen him. Years of frustration was boiling over.
Stop it, just stop it.
She was crying and covering her ears, but he had had enough. Linda was on the floor ready for her dinner, circling Carol's legs. Carol tried to get out of the kitchen and away from Frank. As Frank went to grab her, he tripped on Linda and fell down. Frank screamed out in pain as he hit his head on the oak hutch. He lay there writhing in pain, bleeding all over the floor when Linda came over to check on him, attracted by the smell of fresh blood. Frank grabbed Linda in a fit of rage and snapped her neck. The cat was dead in an instant. Frank had never felt so good and yet so bad at the same time. Carol watched in horror as Linda fell to the floor limp as a rag doll. Frank rolled around on the floor, laughing and holding his injured head. Carol picked up Linda and held her dead body. Crying hysterically, she hugged the large mass of fur. The cat's bowels let loose and spilled all over Carol's apron and onto the floor. Carol rocked back and forth, crying and screaming.
No, no, no!
She wailed. Those damn cats! I should have killed all of them, Frank stammered.
All of them? What do you mean, all of them?
She cried in horror through her tears. Oh, yeah, honey. I killed a bunch of those stupid cats of yours. Carol heard the words, but she couldn't comprehend them. Frank was still on the floor holding his bleeding head, not laughing quite as hard now that the pain had really started to set in. It sure felt good to tell her about her precious little bastards. Carol was reeling. She leaned on the kitchen counter to steady herself. Her heart was pounding hard in her chest and she felt dizzy. She thought of all the cats that had run away or found better homes, not knowing why they had left, just that they didn't love her enough to stay. She hadn't been good enough, wasn't a good enough mother to them. That's all she ever wanted, to be a good mother. Carol vomited into the kitchen sink, still holding on to Linda. How many had he killed? What happened to them? How could he kill a creature as sweet as a little cat? What kind of monster would do that? Frank had tricked her, made her believe she was unlovable. He pretended to be a good man, but he wasn't a good man. He was a monster. He didn't deserve to live. Carol gently set Linda down on the counter. She grabbed a frying pan from the stove and hit Frank on the head as he was trying to get up. He fell back down with a thud. He was not laughing anymore. He cried out in pain as she hit him again. When the pan came down a third time, he blocked it. He swung and hit her in the jaw with a clenched fist. He had never hit a woman before, but he felt like he was fighting for his life. Carol fell backwards onto the floor, her whole head pounded from the blow. Before she could shake it off, Frank was on top of her, hands on her neck. She tried screaming, but no sound came from her collapsed throat. Frank squeezed and screamed like a madman. He was overcome with rage. He felt the soft skin of her wrinkled neck. Under her skin, the ligaments and tendons were tough. It seemed like everything was happening in slow motion, and yet so fast at the same time. She squirmed under him and tried screaming, her eyes as wide as any he had ever seen. Her face was turning purple, and the look of terror she had on her face was that of someone about to die. He wasn't thinking at all at this point. His entire brain was as primal as it got. His heart pounded, sweat and blood rolled off his head and onto her face. She finally stopped struggling and just stared at him with bulging, bloodshot eyes. He was still squeezing her neck with all his strength when he realized she wasn't moving anymore. She just looked up at him with vacant, dead eyes, her mouth screaming a silent scream no one would ever hear. Frank fell over onto the floor crying. He began sobbing uncontrollably as the realization of what he had done began to sink in. The cats that had scattered during the melee started to come back around. It was, after all, their dinner time. Frank finally managed to get to his knees, his hands filling his bleeding head. Still crying, he looked at his dead wife. Cleo, an orange tabby, was standing on her chest, sniffing her face. The other cats mealed around her, wondering what was going on. They looked at her body on the ground and sniffed at the smell of blood and cat feces in the kitchen. Frank was scared. He didn't know what to do next. Should he call the police, confess to killing his wife? Would they believe it was in self-defense? Was it in self-defense? He could have stopped. He should have stopped. His mind was racing. Why didn't he stop? Blood ran in his eyes as he whimpered. His poor wife, he thought. She didn't deserve this. He would fess up to what he did. It was the only way. He tried composing himself as best he could before he tried standing. Frank felt the weight of the world on his shoulders as he pulled himself into a standing position. The pain in his head paled in comparison to the regret he felt for what he had just done. He would go to jail for murder, and he deserved it. The first thing to do was to call the police, tell them what had happened. Frank started for the phone on the wall when he slipped on the spilled contents of Linda's bowels. He came crashing down violently on the hutch again, with even more force than the first time. He heard the loud snap of his neck and then hit the floor. He was face down on the cold linoleum. He slowly opened his eyes and could see only Carol on the floor, surrounded by her hungry, cherished cats waiting for her to wake up and feed them. He tried to get up and found that he was unable to move his arms or legs at all. Despite his efforts, he couldn't move any part of his body. Then he noticed he couldn't feel any part of his body. What happened? What was going on? Frank yelled, hoping his body would wake up and start working again. Nothing. He yelled some more. Yelled out of terror because he was helpless, prone, on the floor. The sun was setting outside and the kitchen was getting darker. Cats meowed and crawled up and down Carol's still body. Frank's voice was raw and hoarse from screaming. The weight of his body made it harder and harder to breathe. He could still see the outline of Carol's body in the dim light. He tried to think of what to do next. He desperately needed help. He faded in and out of consciousness. A dark figure floated above Carol's body. Frank tried to crane his head to get a look at what it was. A flowing black gown covered the head and body so he couldn't tell what he was looking at. It seemed to be looking at Carol, just floating over her. A sick black appendage reached down for her. Frank tried screaming to make it stop, but when he opened his mouth, all that came out was black beetles. Hundreds skittered all over the floor. Frank suddenly woke up and realized he was having a nightmare. He woke up to a real nightmare. Unable to move, he lay there in the very dark room. He couldn't feel it, but he was aware that a cat was on his back. Great, that's all he needed. Frank started screaming again. Help! Somebody! Help! He sobbed at how futile his efforts were. He was so stupid. The neighbors lived too far away for them to hear him. How long would he be there? Who would come looking for them? Anyone? No, there was no one that would realize there was a problem. Frank was scared now, really scared. He came unglued, shrieking at the top of his lungs like a wild animal. This startled the cats that surrounded him. When they realized it was just Frank yelling again, they returned to grooming themselves. All he could do was look at them sitting on and around her. It looked like they were guarding her body. Some of them stared back at him, meowing. Several sat next to their empty food bowls. Good, he thought to himself. No dinner for you tonight, you rotten animals. Frank always insisted that the cats ate after they did. They shouldn't come first all the time. Get off of me! He yelled at the black cat sitting on him. He wasn't even sure of any of their names. It didn't matter anyway, not to him, especially now. The black cat just sat there, unmoved by his pleas. Frank believed in God, but wasn't much for talking to him. Now seemed like a good time to start. God, if you can hear me, I could really use some help about now. I know I messed up, but if you could, help me, please. He whimpered and prayed until he fell asleep. Frank awoke to the sounds of meowing. Hungry cats wandered around the kitchen. They swatted and hissed at each other. Oh yeah, you guys didn't eat last night, did you? Frank growled at them. His mouth was dry. His eyes were crusted over and swollen from crying. Once the cats realized he was awake, they went pleading to him. "Good. I hope you starve." His raw voice cracked. He tried looking around. He strained his eyes, not able to move his head. The kitchen window faced the street. Sunlight was just starting to fill the kitchen through the small window. Maybe the mailman would hear his cries for help when he stopped by later. Wait, what day was it? Damn, it was Sunday. No mailman today. Frank felt a blanket of dread fall on him. He hadn't had any liquids for a long time, and he knew the clock was ticking for him. How long could he last? Not too long without water. Maybe God would answer his prayers and send a neighbor over today. Carol always said God could do anything. Of course, that was long before he murdered her in cold blood, so maybe God wasn't smiling on Frank today. Frank told himself to stay positive. That's when the unthinkable happened. The black cat jumped off of Frank and onto Carol's dead body. He sniffed at her chest, and then walked up to her face and sniffed again. Frank watched as the cat tried to assess the situation. The cat then licked her face. Other cats were closing in to see what this cat was up to. The black cat then nibbled on her chin. He had seen these cats do that sometimes. She said it was a sign of affection towards humans. Frank thought this cat must be missing her. Then, all of a sudden, the cat opened its mouth and chomped down on her lower lip. The cat bit hard and pulled on her stiff lip. "No!" yelled Frank. The black cat ignored him and kept pulling on her flesh. Another cat put its front legs on Carol's shoulders to get a better look at what was happening. Then others came and watched in curiosity. "Stop! Get off her!" Frank was horrified. So many cats were on and around her that he couldn't even see her face anymore. Two cats started fighting like they did over their food. The black cat was pulling harder until it fell back. It turned, and Frank could see it had a piece of Carol's lip in his mouth. Frank screamed again, physically sickened by what he was seeing. The cats were eating her. The black cat ran off with its prize while the other cats were biting and pulling on her face. More fights broke out as they tried to get a piece of her. Frank cried, "You bastards! Get off her!" But they didn't. They were hungry. And for the rest of the day, they helped themselves to the last meal Carol would ever give them. Frank shrieked in mental anguish, screaming and trying to thrash his body. He couldn't move a muscle. All he could do was watch and listen to his wife being devoured by those rotten cats.
I remember when my mom called me and asked that I come home from work early. The request wasn't one I took lightly, as the reason wasn't a good one, and to nobody's surprise, it wasn't. I walked into our small ranch home to see my mother in tears, with my cousin consoling her. She looked up at me with defeat in her eyes and revealed that my grandmother had passed away suddenly. The news was upsetting, but upon instantly recalling the kind of person my grandma was, I couldn't say I was entirely surprised. After the funeral, about a week later, it was time for us to go and collect her things from her home, which was set to be auctioned off next week. We dreaded the idea because her home was littered from wall to ceiling with junk and clutter. Calling my grandma a hoarder is most definitely an understatement. Walls were lined with old pictures of families we didn't even know, and some still had old price tags on them from when she would buy them at garage sales and flea markets. Porcelain dolls lined shelves upon shelves of dusty and dirty glassware from who knows when. Everything in the house seemed to stare at us almost sinisterly. Some figures and paintings even looked frightened and scared of one another. I could go on about what vibes and auras came from the house, but unfortunately, that isn't why I'm writing this. Maybe 3 hours into sorting through boxes upon boxes, we heard a small coo come from a dark corner of the house. I almost jumped, but when a small tin of plastic army soldiers got knocked over, we knew we weren't alone in the house. Mom shot me a confused glance as I walked over to investigate the commotion. At first, I couldn't see anything unusual, just old picture frames and cardboard boxes, but something stuck out. 2 tiny yellow eyes were stalking my movement from underneath an end table. The small creature slowly crawled its way into the dimly lit room, just enough to make out what exactly was watching over me. A small black cat with ragged and patchy fur stopped and sat still by my feet. It had coarse and rough fur that almost didn't cover its whole body. It had specks of white on the tips of each strand, almost making it seem like it was graying like an older person. I knelt down to meet the creature at its level and extended a hand to the feline to offer a gesture of friendship. The cat released a low purr and brushed its head against my hand as it turned and walked toward the kitchen. I asked my mom if she knew about Grandma having a cat, but she told me she didn't know of one. She just explained that old ladies take in anything and everything off the street, and that she was surprised it wasn't a raccoon. I shrugged, but it dawned on me that we couldn't just leave the animal alone to fend for itself. It had survived this long, but that still didn't make it ethical. I asked my mom if she would take it, but she told me she was allergic to cats, which meant that this small problem was now my small problem. I decided I'd grab the cat and take it home until I could find an owner. The only problem was that the animal needed to be seen again. I searched every nook and cranny but found nothing but junk and grime. Then I stumbled upon a crack in the wall around 7 inches wide, just big enough for a cat to slip through. The wall around it had claw marks stretching towards the ceiling, but some were far taller than that small cat could reach. It was a well-traveled path for many animals, so I didn't think anything of it. I made a few calls and noises into the opening, but nothing ever emerged. I figured I would look for the cat tomorrow when we returned, so I got my mother and we headed home for the evening. The next morning, my mother and I returned to the house again to sort through more junk. When we arrived, I noticed a tiny critter standing in the front window peering out at us. It was the cat from before. I opened the door to the home and the cat swiftly pounced over to me. It seemed quite excited that I was there. It rubbed all over my ankles as I walked, nearly tripping me with every step. It made a small jingle as it pranced around, and I noticed a tiny leather collar surrounding the cat's neck. It had a gold medallion with the name Tiny on it. My mother saw the cat and immediately questioned its strange fur pattern. I decided to research it, and the picture I used to reverse search gave me pages upon pages of information about a cat breed known as a Lycoy, which actually translates to wolf cat due to its mangy but perfectly healthy and natural appearance. While Mom sorted through more boxes, I grew more accustomed to my newfound sidekick. The cat wouldn't leave me alone no matter what I did. I couldn't even sneak to the restroom without it following me. When the sun began to set and twilight stretched over the sky, we knew it was time to retreat from the mess once again and go home. As I was about to leave, I noticed the cat wasn't following in my shadow anymore. The animal was actually making a quick stride toward the crack in the wall that I presumed it had gone into yesterday. Making a dash to stop it from escaping again, I snatched it up from the ground and held it tight so that I could get it home safely and be able to properly care for it. The cat began to claw at me and call out wildly. I expected this, but knew it was for the animal's own good, as who knows what kind of poisons or hazardous materials it could get into. I put the cat in my car and it quickly hid underneath the passenger seat in a defensive position. That night, when we got home, Tiny made his way through my home, inspecting his surroundings and almost seeming intent on looking for something. The animal gave up after an hour and hid behind my couch. I figured I would give it the night to get accustomed to its temporary home before trying to get involved. So I poured a bowl of cat food I purchased on the way home and went to bed. As I laid my head down, I could have sworn I had heard meowing through the house, but I assumed it was likely just a curious cat exploring this strange new world. I just wondered why it was so loud. When I woke up the next morning and walked out to the living room, I almost dropped my phone. The room was torn apart, with tables and chairs knocked over and massive gashes in the couch and armchair. I picked up my phone and dialed 911 to tell the police about a break-in. When an officer arrived to take notes of what had happened, he seemed just as confused as I was. Things were torn apart like a stampede had just gone through, but nothing was missing. Granted, most of what was left was in pieces, but it was still technically accounted for. The officer said he would look for any local cameras to see if anybody snuck in overnight, but that there was no evidence of a break-in, as my door and windows were all intact and still locked. As the officer left, I noticed a small creature stroll out from behind my fridge. It was tiny, and he walked with an almost injured limp over to his food bowl and finished off the last of the kibble left in his bowl from last night. He walked over sorely to the chair, jumped on it, and sat down. Of course, the thought had crossed my mind that Tiny might be behind the destruction, but the thought of him walking around with a machete and crowbar made me chuckle. I decided to go for a walk to put this behind me and thought Tiny might want to join me. So I took a piece of thin rope and tied it around his collar for a makeshift leash. As I started to walk, I noticed something. Tiny wasn't limping anymore. As a matter of fact, he seemed rather spry. That night, things took a turn for the worse. Around 7 o'clock, Tiny acted both injured and sick. He wasn't nearly as lively as he was in the morning, and he had a hunched back and returned to limping again. He was antisocial and insisted on hiding all night. I wanted to keep a close eye on him, so I decided to put his food bowl in my room and shut the door with both of us inside. I truly wish I had just let him hide where he wanted. As I turned out the light, Tiny was hiding under my desk, meowing and growling like crazy. I figured I would give him a moment to stop, but tomorrow would be an immediate trip to the vet. About 10 minutes passed in the dark before I heard him begin to growl once again. This time, it was new, in a much lower and pained tone. I heard the chair by the desk fall over from what I assumed was a rather restless Tiny, but my heart sank to my feet from what followed next. Tiny jumped up onto my bed, but this was no mere cat that had landed on my legs. The sheer weight of the figure rivaled that of a human being. It almost knocked me out of the bed altogether. I felt large paws that seemed like hands slowly crawl up my body. I froze with a sense of sleep paralysis as I felt large breaths waft over my neck, followed by a low purr that seemed like a growl. I didn't want to move. I wanted to call the police or turn on the light, but I knew what I would see wouldn't be something I could forget. I felt a sudden weight shift, followed by a loud yet careful thud hitting the floor with a sudden strike. The thing had jumped off of my bed and left me alone. I was still too scared to move, and knew that the being was still stuck in my room due to the door being shut. But the thought was interrupted by a crashing noise against my door. It sounded like it was charging directly into the exit to force its way out. I then heard loud and fast scratches, like nails dragging across rough wood. Every swipe made an ear-splitting noise that made my frozen state worsen. Finally, I heard a yanking noise followed by the door swinging open violently. It crashed against the wall with the force of a freight train, and I heard the thud of feet stalk out the rest of the house and down the hallway. I almost gathered the courage to move my leg, but then I heard the thing call out from the other end of the house. It was a menacing and almost threatening call that sounded like a beast was trying to mimic a cat's meow. I then heard it began to beat on the front door and struggle for moments before it finally bashed through. The house immediately fell silent, so I knew the beast had made it out of the house. I raced to turn on the lights and noticed my desk chair was flipped over and claw marks surrounded my desk. My bedroom door was nearly turned to shreds with markings and indentations covering it. I walked out to my living room and saw that my front door was completely smashed and lying on my front porch. I wanted to call the police again, but knew they would gain unwanted suspicions if I called about the same issue. What would I tell them? That my cat had turned into a monster and ran away? I would rather not spend the night in jail for suspicion of drug use. I couldn't sleep after trying my best to repair the damage. I recall turning on the TV to a breaking news story of multiple assaults and break-ins. A man was apparently even killed overnight in a parking garage. His body was mutilated almost beyond recognition, and his possessions were stolen. I feared knowing that the perpetrator could have been the thing that was Tiny, but I knew the thought would only bring me distress. I tried shrugging it off as a crime spree of some maniac, preferably one without fur and whiskers. I needed some fresh air, so I decided to step out to my backyard and drink a cup of coffee to forget the events of last night. After all, I couldn't remember what was real and what could have been a simple nightmare due to lack of sleep. But then, I noticed something. Next to my patio was a small stack of objects. They had a brilliant shine and stuck out like a sore thumb. The pile consisted of rings and jewelry. There were purses and wallets with entire stacks of cash lying around them. There were easily thousands of dollars just sitting there, not counting the value of the physical items. I stood frozen, wondering how they ended up in my yard. But I froze again as I came to realize that some of these items I recognized from the news. The man who was killed, his wallet was sitting in the pile, with flecks of red still covering it. I didn't know what to do, but felt something brushing against my leg. It was Tiny, just as he was when I first found him. Small, lively, and cute in an ugly sort of way. His color reflected gold onto the ground below. I didn't know what to do. If I were to call the police, they would arrest me on the spot. They wouldn't believe that I had just found the night's crimes neatly piled in my backyard. But I didn't have time to dwell before a knock hit my front door. It was a police officer and a detective. They asked what had happened to my front door, and I told them that my house had been broken into again the previous night. They actually had come to follow up on the previous night's events, specifically about having an update on my initial call. They asked a series of questions that I either didn't know or lied about to cover my own tale. Tiny jumped up to one of the men and sniffed around before hissing at him and then running away to hide. He didn't seem too fond of them. The police had asked me to lock my doors and windows at night in case I hadn't already done so. They said the neighborhood was under a temporary curfew following the night's events. Travel was only advised if necessary, and travel was not allowed alone or without protection. I thanked them for their time, and they left. As soon as they had left, Tiny pranced out almost happily. I stared at the cat as he stared back, almost as if he knew that I knew what he had done. I decided to inspect my grandmother's house to track down any background of this feline imposter. I searched the house for hours but found nothing. No adoption papers, no cat supplies. It was as if Grandma hadn't owned him at all. I decided the only place left to look was where he had come from initially. I walked over to the crack in the wall to inspect it. I knew I couldn't fit, but considering the state of the house, I knew one hole wouldn't make a difference. So I grabbed a nearby hammer and smashed a wider opening in the wall. The crawl space it led into was dark and musty, with dead mice all around it. I noticed a small wooden box was tucked away in the corner, so I grabbed it and backed out of the hole. There was a golden latch that almost perfectly matched the gold of Tiny's collar. I opened it to reveal a small sheet of paper inside, but nothing else. The writing was old, very old. It seemed to be written in ink with a quill on yellowed and decaying paper. It read as follows: "To whom it may concern. The companion you have just acquired was secured in an expedition to redacted. While its true origins are unknown, the animal is wise beyond its means and possesses a nearly impossible trait. Upon feeding the animal, it bonds with its caretaker and offers a rather sinful and monstrous service in return. One night a week, the animal will take on a form that is neither of god nor beast and will retrieve riches and possessions for its caretaker, no matter the means. It has slain innocent men in the night, and upon our travels killed half a village of natives and piled its stolen plunder in our own satchels and baggage. A few of my men have seen the beast in its altered form and refuse to speak of it. I issue this letter as a warning to all those who may cross paths with the beast. May God not blame you for its own misdeeds." Enclosed with the letter was an old photograph of a wooded area at night, but in the center of the picture stood a being, nearly 6 feet tall. It had dark, scraggly fur with hunched legs and a long, loose tail that dragged the ground behind it. It had piercing yellow eyes that seemed to glare into my soul. It had a wide, sharp grin that seemed so uncanny that I couldn't tell whether it was smiling or screaming. Its claws were long and slightly resembled human hands, but they were still quite discernible from them. It stood on 2 legs in a position that seemed like it would pounce at any second. However, the tightly fit collar stood out to me the most, with a gold coin hanging just beneath its neck. I held the letter in shock, knowing that if last night hadn't happened, I wouldn't believe it myself. I made my way home and was greeted by a sleeping Tiny sprawled across the arm of my chair. I sat down and stared at the sleeping animal. I thought through the events of last night and wondered how long it would take the police to trace this back to me and my newfound thief. But I realized that, at least for the time being, I wasn't a suspect. I was a victim. The police had thought my house was just another home in a chain of crimes. After all, I would be accounted for all night, as it was someone other than me who would be out painting the town red. I could use the money that was found, after all. As I'm writing this, I now live in a secluded area of Northeast America. I now possess a fully restored Victorian home on 45 acres of property with multiple estates nationwide. I have been investigated a few times, but there's never been any proof of wrongdoing. As a matter of fact, I pride myself of how well I've hidden my side gig. It's that day of the week again, which means I suspect Tiny will be shedding some fur and playing fetch in the next few hours. I truly do apologize to anybody who has fallen victim to my actions. It isn't personal, I assure you. But the way I see it, it's better to have control over the animal myself than risk it coming and turning on me. I think you understand.
Mission recruit Aldo happened to glance out a window port just in time to observe an escape module eject from a hatch on the starboard bow. A couple of erratic bursts from the thrusters changed its course in a sharp curve, sending it hurtling past the window port at less than 50 yards. It was close enough for Aldo to get a good look at the occupant inside. He was horrified to see that it was Bonkers, one of the 6 cats that served as rat control aboard the Lucy 13. The tabby was wildly flailing her legs and spinning like a top in the zero-gravity environment, her eyes as wide as saucers and her mouth gaping open in a silent yowl of terror. He whispered, "Oh shit," and ran for the nearest horn to call command deck. This was a BFM in the making. BFM was a universal acronym used throughout the space mining industry. It stood for Big Fucking Mess. Aldo called the starboard command deck, and Chief Petty Officer Vardel answered with an impatient,
"What's your malfunction, mission recruit? You need me to come down there and show you how to push a mop?"
Aldo sputtered. "Sir, an escape module just ejected from a hatch in Section K." There was a muttering of voices as Vardel told the deck crew to check on the status of the escape modules. He came back on the horn and grunted.
"That's affirmative. There was a pod ejection just over a minute ago. Hustle over to K right now and see what's happening."
Aldo swallowed a lump of dread in his throat. Timidly, he said, "Sir, I made visual contact with the occupant inside the pod. It was, it was one of the cats." He was answered with a long moment of incredulous silence, followed by,
"What the fuck? What in the almighty fuck did you just tell me, recruit? A fucking cat? How in hell?"
"I really don't know, sir," Aldo answered in a pleading tone. "I saw it happen through the window port, while I was swabbing the main corridor in Section J. She must have gotten in there somehow and launched it by accident." Vardel snorted.
"Somehow? The cat just somehow got through a locked door? Tell me something, recruit. Who is responsible for swabbing the floors in Section K?"
Aldo closed his eyes and sighed. "Me. I'm responsible for Sections J, K, and L."
"Well, that means you're the only living soul down there with a key card. Unless maybe the cat had one too. Refresh my memory, recruit. Did we issue a key card to the fucking cats?"
"No, sir," Aldo mumbled. "I'm the only one down here with a card."
"I'm checking the entry log right now,"
Vardel said.
"And it looks like you opened the entrance to the escape modules about 45 minutes ago. You put the door on hold, and you left it on hold, you stupid son of a bitch!"
Aldo started to protest, but the chief petty officer interrupted him with a roar of pure, unadulterated fury. He bellowed,
"Tell me the pod launched away from the Delta Moon! Tell me the autopilot system didn't home in on Delta! Fucking please!"
Aldo grimaced and answered, "The cat was freaking out. I think it must have hit the thrusters a few times. It changed course and, yeah, the autopilot definitely locked in onto the Delta Moon." There was another dense block of silence on Vardel's end, and then he ordered Aldo to stay put and wait for security to escort him to the deck. Aldo closed his eyes again and answered, "Yes, sir. I'll be right here." Vardel growled,
"Keep mopping, recruit. Finish that floor while you're waiting for the bot."
The chief petty officer disconnected without another word, leaving the young mission recruit standing there with tears welling up in his eyes. He was in very deep shit, and if the escape pod landed on Delta, everyone was in deep shit, from the lowest recruit right up to the captain of the Lucy-13. The ministry would issue a massive fine to the North American mining concern. They might even revoke their contract, and then everyone aboard the Lucy-13 would find themselves out of a job. The ministry didn't mess around when it came to the Preservation Act. Heads were about to roll, and his own stupid melon would undoubtedly be the first on the chopping block. Aldo muttered, "Fuck this job," and he started shoving the mop across the floor with sharp, bitter movements. "I fucking hate this job." Delta was the fourth largest moon of the gas giant RVD-245. It was more commonly known in the space mining industry as the Golden Colossus, or Goldie for short. Goldie lay at the outer edge of a dead solar system. Its star had expanded into a red giant many millions of years ago, devouring most of its orbiting planets and boiling away the atmospheres from the rest of them. Out of the 12 planets, only the Golden Colossus had survived. When the red giant eventually collapsed into a white dwarf, it left 11 scorched rocks floating in the void, all of them rich in metal ores. It was the North American mining concern's wildest dream come true. Even Goldie's swarm of moons were all rich in precious metals and valuable elements. The entire solar system was a space miner's paradise. However, there was still one pocket of life to be found in this cosmic crypt, the Delta Moon. It was slightly larger than the planet Earth, big enough to have an active magnetosphere to protect it from the majority of Goldie's intense radiation. Delta's upper atmosphere was swirling with particulate matter from the intermittent eruptions of the volcanoes which smoldered away at its poles, creating a benign sort of greenhouse effect that allowed for both liquid water and complex forms of life. The Ministry had suspected as much for almost a century, but after it had been confirmed by a series of drone missions, the Delta Moon was given protected status under the Alien Preservation Act. After 900 years of humankind ruthlessly mining every planet, asteroid, and comet we could get our greedy hands on, the Preservation Act was put in place to protect alien ecosystems from human interference. Mining contracts could not legally be awarded by the Ministry until they had ascertained there would be no appreciable disruption to life. Until then, any outside interference would be met with crushing fines and the possibility of a lengthy sentence at a deep space penal colony. The penal colonies were notorious for being little pockets of hell in the void. Some of them weren't even equipped with artificial gravity, and cannibal riots were a fairly common occurrence in a few of the more remote institutions. The probability of being murdered in one of these colonies could run as high as 50%. Their very existence was a fairly effective deterrent against space piracy, unethical mining practices, and, of course, violations of the APA. The Ministry had discovered Delta's atmosphere was almost identical to planet Earth, which created quite a stir among the scientific community. The drone missions had painted a vivid picture of a rich and varied ecosystem, creating even more excitement. But the Ministry still didn't know about the most exciting thing of all. The golden egg they had been chasing for centuries was right there, living beneath the thick canopy of the equatorial jungle. Delta was home to intelligent life. These diminutive creatures had descended from a bird-like ancestor, a flightless land dweller similar to an ostrich. They had fallen into an evolutionary path that saw them slowly shrink in stature, gradually developing appendages similar to arms along the way. Their plumage became an illustrious coat of fur that shimmered in breathtaking hues of blue, orange, and crimson, and their eyes evolved to make the most of the dim lighting beneath the canopy of the jungle. By the time the first Ministry drone had entered Delta's atmosphere, the bird-like ancestors had fully evolved into an agrarian society of Stone Age humanoids. They called themselves the People, and very soon their kind would become extinct. Delta's last ice age had lasted almost 200,000 years, wiping out almost all of the land-dwelling fauna. Any species that was too large to retreat underground eventually perished in the frozen wastelands. The end result was a complete lack of larger carnivores. The people lived without fear of predation. This was a good thing because they were very, very small. They stood an average height of 7 inches high, and they weighed roughly half a pound. Their villages were idyllic farming collectives, all of them working together to cultivate crops of mushrooms and tubers. Arguments were rare, and violence was a concept that simply did not exist. The Delta Moon skies were perpetually smudged by a dull fog of volcanic debris, so the people had no understanding of outer space, other worlds, or even the scope of their own planet. Life was easy in this land of plenty, so they had no incentive to ponder the future. There was only now, and then tomorrow, and then the day after that. With no weapons, defense mechanisms, or even the ability to think in terms of the future, the people were completely and utterly unprepared for what was about to descend upon them. The escape pod's autopilot system deftly guided it through the turbulent entrance into Delta's thick upper atmosphere. This was the most terrifying part of the journey for poor Bonkers, who mercifully blacked out during entry. She became conscious again while the module was floating down to the ground far below, bobbing and weaving beneath a giant parachute as the jungle canopy grew closer every second. There was another rough spot when the pod broke through the upper fronds and bashed its way to the ground, making her squeal and shiver as she was flounced and jounced around the interior of the module. It finally thunked into the soft ground below, and the hatch popped open with a loud. After that, all was quiet and still in the jungle once again. Eventually, a pink nose and tangle of whiskers appeared. The nose sniffed at the air and immediately sneezed. That brief little sniff had contained a startling array of scents, more scents than Bonkers had ever encountered throughout the duration of her life on a space freighter. She slithered out of the pod and immediately climbed into the lower fronds of a nearby tree, staring at her surroundings with her ears flattened against her skull. She could sense life all around her, life of all kinds in virtually every nook and cranny of the jungle. Was it dangerous? She backed herself against the massive trunk of the tree and continued sampling the warm, dusky air with her tail lashing around in agitation. She couldn't smell any predators, not yet anyway, but she did smell prey. Lots and lots of prey. Multitudes of creatures both helpless and small. She cautiously scuttled back down and hunkered at the base of the tree, nostrils delicately flaring as she assessed her surroundings. Bonkers had somehow transitioned from following her favorite human around as he did his human things to this, crouching low to the ground in an untouched wilderness that was literally crawling with life. Her simple little brain was nearly short-circuited from the enormity of the change. Bonkers still couldn't sense any large carnivores nearby, but the scent of prey was almost overwhelming. She began to stalk her way through the undergrowth, eyes wide and wild as her biological imperatives took control. There were many things to hunt in this place, more than all the rats aboard all the freighter ships in the entire galaxy. She would find them and she would kill them all, because killing was what she was designed to do. Her gait became more confident with every step she took. At 10 pounds, 6 ounces of limber ferocity, Bonkers was officially at the top of the Delta food chain. It was time to hunt. Back on the Lucy 13, Captain Munez was listening with a deepening frown as Aldo recounted the events which led to Bonkers getting ejected from an escape hatch. He was still wrapped in the metallic grip of the security bot that had detained him down in Section J, and there was nothing in the captain's furious gaze that indicated he might be released anytime soon. One of her eye sockets was an ugly ring of scar tissue that housed a digital eye, an unnerving device which gleamed a cold shade of blue. Aldo tried to concentrate on the captain's human eye while he was talking. The digital one made him want to squirm. Captain Munez patiently waited for his halting, stumbling story to finish. She folded her arms in front of her and said,
"Mission recruit, you fucked up pretty bad today, didn't you?"
Aldo nodded, the only movement he could accomplish in the security bot's coffin-like embrace. "Yes, Captain Munez," he sniffed. "Yes, I sure did." She nodded back and said,
"Good. Then we agree on something. So it appears our missing pod landed near the equator on the eastern half of the globe. The hatch opened, so we can assume the cat got out and is still alive. No one's sure what kind of impact that's going to have on the ecosystem, but we can also assume that it won't be positive. Are we still in agreement?"
"Yes, Captain," Aldo muttered quietly.
"Now, let me tell you something,"
she continued. Her voice was calm, but her electric eye was now blazing a furious shade of dark purple.
"We're all full of germs. You, me, Petty Officer Vartel over there, and even that fucking cat. We all have germs. Most of them can't hurt us, but there's a good chance they may be able to hurt something from another world. Agreed?"
Aldo nodded again, Munez nodded back and said,
Good. So in summary, we could say that you, despite all the precautions we have in place to prevent this kind of thing from happening, you managed to release a murderous little bioweapon onto the surface of the Delta Moon. Are we still agreeing with each other, you incompetent shit-lick little bastard of a mission recruit?
his words barely audible. Aldo wheezed. Yes, but
I can't goddamn well hear you, boy!
And Aldo let out a yelp of pure terror. The young recruit blinked back his tears and weakly hollered, Yes, Captain, we are in agreement.
Good. Now this is what we're going to do, okay? We're going to head back to the Goldie and lock into orbit around Delta. You and CPO Vardal are going to take a lander module down to the surface. You're going to find both the escape pod and the cat, and you're going to bring them back. I'll give you 4 hours to complete this mission.
Vardal turned to her with a look of sharp dismay and sputtered,
Captain, I'm not the one who left the door open. Why do I have to go down to the surface? This is his fault, not mine.
You're piss poor at doing your job, that's why.
Captain Munez snapped.
The entrance to the escape modules was on hold for 45 minutes and you never thought to check it out? It's your command deck, Vardal. You're responsible for everything that happens under your command, good or bad. Why are you shirking your responsibilities?
Vardal looked down at his shoes. The captain eyed him sourly and added,
I've heard about you. No one likes you. And do you know why? Because a good CPO isn't a shitty little tyrant. A good CPO would never push the blame onto their crew.
Vardal flushed a deep, ugly red. Captain Munez glared at him, silently daring him to say something. Anything at all. Aldo cleared his throat and croaked. I have a question, Captain.
Ask away, recruit.
Aldo licked his lips nervously and asked, What happens if we can't find the cat? The captain skewered him with her electric glare and shook her head.
If you fail to apprehend the cat, I won't let you aboard the ship. I'll tell NORAM you stole the escape pod after I caught you trying to pilfer the cargo hold. And that'll be the end of it.
Vardal clenched his fists and barked.
Are you crazy? You can't do that!
She pointed at the inky blackness on the other side of a window port and sneered.
I wouldn't bet on it. People disappear in the void all the time. No one's going to come looking for you.
She ordered the bot to release Aldo and told the reluctant duo to get ready to launch. As the security bot escorted them out the door, Captain Munez called out,
I'm not going to sink my entire career over a fucking cat. Do you understand me? Find the cat and find the pod, or you're not coming back.
Bonkers made his first kill within minutes of setting off into the jungle. The victim was one of Delta's top predators, an inch-long rodent that hunted tube worms with its whip-like tail. Bonkers made short work of the former champ, then moved on to obliterate a nest of flightless birds that were distant relatives of the people. They could do nothing but scream in terror and die beneath her claws. She moved on once again, restlessly tracking hundreds of mingling scent trails, all of them rich with the promise of easy prey. It wasn't long before she encountered the first village, a collection of mud huts encircling a tiny fire pit. She was spotted by a villager who sounded the alarm with a high-pitched squeak that immediately drove the tabby into a murderous frenzy. She pounced on the tiny creature as he ran for his hut and bit off his head. The following 96 seconds were pure unadulterated chaos, and then it was over. Bonkers had killed everyone in the entire village, leaving a horrific mess of scattered bodies and mangled corpses in her wake. She followed a trail that led to a second village, and the scene played out once again. The trail was a common road built by the people to link scores of villages together, inadvertently giving the tabby a roadmap for mass murder. Bonkers killed and killed again, destroying villages and cramming her belly full of delectable alien innards well into the night. Eventually she ran out of steam, and the marooned freighter cat abruptly realized that it was very dark and she was all alone. She mewed and cried for her humans to come rescue her. When no one came, she resigned herself to her fate and found a soft patch of moss to sleep on. The feline invader awoke just before dawn, momentarily confused and afraid in the dark. Bonker started meowing for her people again, but then she remembered the taste of blood. She was free to explore all the rich smells in the dark earth and lush vegetation, and she could hunt to her heart's content. Head scratches and kind words were nice, but killing was infinitely better. Right around the time Bonkers was engaging in a long and sultry morning stretch, the Lucy 13 locked into a tight orbit around Delta. A hatch opened on the port side of the massive freighter, releasing a tiny metallic speck into the void. It was a lander module. CPO Vardal was at the controls and mission recruit Aldo was in the passenger seat. He was a mess of screaming nerves and fluttering stomach. He didn't like being outside the protective walls of the Lucy 13 one bit. Space was too dark, too vast, directionless and infinite. It made him feel wholly insignificant. The lander cruised its way down to Delta with Goldie looming in the background, a massive orb of racing clouds and unimaginably violent storms. CPO Vardal navigated their entry with a practiced hand. He looked over at Aldo's pale, sweating face and said, "Better get used to it, recruit. You're going to be on surface duty for the next 6 months. I'll make sure of it." They honed in on the escape pod's rescue signal and landed nearby in a natural clearing. Although the atmosphere was breathable for Earthlings, they both wore landing suits to protect the environment from their germs, as well as isolating themselves from the unknown microbes that dwelled on Delta's surface. The suits were heavy, cumbersome, and hot. With the temperature hovering at just over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, both men were soon covered in a film of greasy sweat. They wrestled the pod into a gravity sled and stowed it into the cargo hold of the lander. Sweating buckets beneath the rigid confines of his suit, Aldo gasped, "How are we supposed to find a cat down here? You can't see more than 10 feet away in this undergrowth." Vardal tapped the screen on the back of his gauntlet and said, "The system can track the little shithead down in all kinds of ways. We'll find it, probably scared out of its mind and hiding somewhere. Look, we already got a hit. Let's go." They followed the cat's meandering path through the jungle, pushing through the unfamiliar vegetation with as much care as they could muster in the heat. They were both tired and more than a little traumatized by their encounter with the captain, who was rumored to have lost her eye while engaging in hand-to-hand combat with a band of marauding ore pirates. She was a tough old space dog who had a vested interest in protecting her ship, its cargo, and the good standing of the Noram mining concern in the eyes of the Ministry. She had no concern whatsoever for a low-ranking officer and his bumbling oaf of a mission recruit. Their future depended on finding the cat before their time was up, and the clock was ticking. The lander didn't have enough fuel to take them very far. They could either find the cat or be stranded on an alien world. Aldo and Vardal soon began to find dead creatures of various kinds on the ground, a wandering path of murder that gradually led to another clearing in the jungle. It was the site of the first village to fall beneath the homicidal fury of Bonkers the cat. They both froze and stared in slack-jawed dismay at the aftermath of the freighter cat's frenzied assault. Vardal leaned down to study a diminutive structure that had been deftly peeled open with sharp claws. He shook his head in wonder. "There's furniture in here," he whispered. "A little fire pit and everything. This is a house, Aldo. And that's a cultivated field over there. Look, you can see how that fungus is all lined up in rows. These things were intelligent. This is exactly what the Ministry is looking for. Right here and—" He trailed off, and the two men shared a look of pure horror. His voice trembling, Vardal said, "We can't tell anyone, especially not the captain. She'd court-martial us right then and there. They'd launch us out of the airlock and use our bodies for target practice." Aldo squinted at his gauntlet and pointed to the far side of the village. He said,
"There's a little path over here that leads into the jungle. That's where she went."
Vartal shook his head again at the crumpled bodies at his feet. He glared at Aldo and snarled,
"Come on, dickhead. Let's snatch this little fucker and get out of here."
Shortly after the lander module had descended to Delta's surface, a NORAM personnel carrier docked with the Lucy-13, which was promptly boarded by an armed company of Special Forces troops. They were led by Admiral Boswick, one of the top commanders in the NORAM Security Division. The intruders swept their way across the ship in a surging wave of black fatigues and laser-guided carbines, sending people scattering for cover with the crashing echo of their jack-booted feet. They barged into the main command deck with no resistance from the guards, and Admiral Boswick immediately stormed over to glower down at Captain Munez. She greeted Boswick with narrowed eyes and put her fist to her heart in the NORAM salute.
"To what do I owe the pleasure of your company, Admiral?"
Boswick growled.
Let's get straight to the point, Captain. We intercepted a rescue signal from one of your escape modules. It's coming from the surface of Delta. What the hell is going on here?
Munez hesitated, then calmly answered.
"There was a malfunction, sir. We're working to rectify the situation right now."
The Admiral nodded his massive shaggy head in mock agreement and said,
Well, I'm sure it's all under control then. No need to worry about the Protection Act. We'll just tell them we're working to rectify the situation, correct? Tell me, Captain, how exactly are we doing that? Please explain.
She fought to keep her expression neutral and said,
"With the landing crew, sir. We're retrieving the pod and bringing it back as we speak."
The Admiral looked her in the eye until Munez dropped her gaze.
I have eyes everywhere, Captain. I already know what happened. This is a BFM of staggering proportions. I'm here to relieve you of your command. You're under arrest.
Munez closed her eyes and grimaced. Softly, she said,
"You don't have to do that, Boswick. We can sweep this under the rug. It's already happening."
The Admiral stared at her for a long, agonizing moment, and then a look of amusement slowly spread across his face. He flapped his hand at her and started to laugh.
I'm fucking with you, Munez. I'm not going to do that. In fact, I want to thank you, because this fuck-up was the catalyst for a very important decision. Now, don't get me wrong, Captain. NORAM isn't very happy with you right now. That's why I came in hot like this, but don't worry. It's all for show. This will blow over pretty soon. A few months of relaxing on a simulated beach and you'll be back at the helm again. Does that sound good?
Cautiously, Munez asked,
"What are you talking about?"
The Admiral pointed down at Delta and said,
Thorium. NORAM funded a private study of their own, and they're about 99% sure there's enough thorium under the surface to power 1 million reactors. The only thing stopping us is the APA, but the Protection Act only regulates mining operations on living planets, not dead ones.
Munez blinked up at him and murmured,
"What are you proposing, Admiral? I don't understand."
The cat is just a bit of contamination,
he said briskly.
It's not good enough. We need total and complete annihilation. Say goodbye to your command chair and pack your bags, because we're going to dump the Lucy-13.
Faintly, Munez said,
"What? The hold is full of ore, Admiral. That's a huge loss for the mining concern."
Boswick frowned and impatiently shook his head.
Big fucking deal. No one cares about the ore in that cargo hold. It's a drop in the bucket compared to the riches down below. Initiate the evacuation procedure, Captain. Your crew can board my carrier. I expect everyone to be on board within 30 minutes, or they're going down with the Lucy-13.
Understanding dawned across the captain's face. She blinked up at him and asked,
"What about the ministry? There'll be an investigation."
Boswick shushed her with a raised finger.
They don't know it yet, but the ministry is on its way out. They're standing in the way of progress, and frankly, There are people in high places who are getting tired of it. There's money to be made out here. More money than you or I could possibly imagine. The bottom line is that we have to stop worrying about a bunch of alien tadpoles and get down to the business of mining. The Eurasian mining concern hasn't been regulated for decades now, so why aren't we doing the same?
The Admiral leaned in closer and purred.
By the time you get back from your vacation, the Ministry will no longer exist. It's the dawn of a new era in space mining, Captain. This is history in the making.
He looked down at Delta again, a precious spark of life in the vast graveyard of space, and he turned off the video feed with a brisk stab of the finger.
Progress,
he said.
There's nothing more beautiful than progress. Start the evacuation, Captain. We leave in half an hour.
Vartal and Aldo found Bonkers in the middle of another village massacre. She dropped a bloody corpse in her mouth and scampered up to her humans with unadulterated joy, expecting a shower of love and praise for a job well done. Instead, she was shoved into a cat carrier as the bird-like cries of the people rang through the air behind her. The surviving villagers scrambled to escape the horrifying giants who had stomped into their midst, abandoning the dead and dying to suffer their fate.
Jesus Christ, what a clusterfuck,
Aldo panted.
Okay, let's get back to the lander. We don't have much time.
CPO Vartal gave the young recruit a flat, merciless grin, and he flicked off the safety switch on his sidearm. He pointed it at Aldo and said,
"You know what? No. Not you, motherfucker."
Aldo tried to run, but it was far too late. Vartal squeezed the trigger and Aldo collapsed onto the ground. His helmet now fused to his smoking cranium in a scorched, unrecognizable mess. Vartal kicked the body in the ribs just for good measure, and he scooped up the cat carrier with shaking hands. He gasped beneath the weight of his suit as he hustled back to the lander. He arrived with only 15 minutes left to spare, exhausted and trembling from an overload of adrenaline. Vartal stumbled into the lander and wheezed.
"Fuck you. You're not leaving me behind."
He initiated the lander's autopilot and hurried outside to clear away the undergrowth from the intake ports. While he was furiously tearing away a tangle of vines, the unthinkable happened. The lander closed its hatch, and with a violent rumbling from its engines, it shot up straight into the sky. Vartal was knocked to the ground with the force of the blast. The lander was gone within seconds, rapidly disappearing into the murky cloud cover high above. Vartal sat up and screamed,
"What the fuck? What the fuck just happened?"
The autopilot had chosen to blast off without warning, as it was programmed to do in the face of an immediate emergency. But why did that happen? What the hell was the emergency? Seconds later, Vartal heard it, a thundering groan in the heavens above. He stared in disbelief as fiery projectiles began to rain from the sky. Vartal's breath caught in his throat. He knew what was about to happen.
"No. Oh my God, no!"
And then the flaming hull of the Lucy-13 was shoving through the cloud cover, and a noise like thunder drowned out Vartal's hysterical screams. The ship was 1/2 mile long, 1/4 mile wide, and its cargo hold was full of metallic ore. It was also equipped with heavy munitions and a thorium power plant that generated an enormous amount of energy. It was the bomb to end all bombs, and the explosion was seen clear across the entire star cluster. Delta was swept by a raging tsunami of nuclear hellfire, and all that dwelled beneath the opaque veil of its skies was obliterated forever. Back on the personnel carrier, the first mate spun around in his chair and called out, "Admiral, we have some company." Boswick and Munez studied the screen in disbelief.
You gotta be kidding me.
Boswick snapped.
It's the lander from the Lucy 13. All right, let it dock. Let's see who survived.
A tech called up from the dock and informed Boswick there was only one occupant in the lander. A cat. Boswick looked over at Munez and said,
Well, it looks like Whiskers came home. The autopilot must have guided her to the closest ship. It's a good thing for Kitty we weren't in a hurry, or she would have run out of fuel trying to catch us.
The poor thing will have to be quarantined for at least a month.
Munez sighed.
I feel sorry for the cat. She destroyed an entire world and it wasn't even her fault.
Progress.
Admiral Boswick rumbled.
Nothing can stand in the way of progress.
Just a few alien tadpoles.
Munez said reflectively as she absently shook her head.
I'll keep telling myself that. I guess I'll believe it soon enough.
Progress.
Boswick repeated, and he poured them both a stiff drink from the minibar.
You can't stop it. Don't even try. Cheers, Munez. Here's to a new era.
A new era.
She agreed, and they both knocked back their drinks with a bitter grimace. Boswick put down his glass and quietly said,
It doesn't matter if you like it or not. The galaxy is up for sale. And after humankind pillages it from end to end, we'll start on the next one. There is no turning back at this point, not even if we wanted to. The only way to keep feeding the machine is to mine larger amounts of ore, for the sole purpose of creating more machines. Stopping this cycle would spell the end of humanity. There's nothing that can be done except to keep bowling forward. It's a long-distance race with no finish line. The end of the race is extinction, so the race can never end.
Munez blinked away a sudden film of tears from her living eye. The other remained cold and dry, shining a dim turquoise from the depths of her scar tissue. She poured herself another drink and muttered,
I know that. I'm not stupid.
That's the spirit,
Boswick agreed, and they both drank in silence as Goldie receded in the background. A new era loomed on the horizon. Consume or be consumed was the sole directive of this brave new age in space exploration. All other tenets were meaningless, antiquated, and lost in the void. Mercy was not profitable. It was a dusty relic of the ancient past, buried in stardust and eulogized by the ghosts of our ancestors. Progress is the future, and the future is dark.
Perhaps the most oddball thing about this story is it's only true in some circles, mainly orbiting around a kooky, enigmatic planet in a timeless, encapsulated cosmos yet to be explored and plumbed. Within the unfathomable, outlandish, swirling, untested alchemy, someone decided to invite the outcasts, the throwaways, the misfits, the artsy type, to a party. They were not necessarily malcontent, and I'll tell you why. They were not purposefully rebellious for the sake of anarchy, nor egomaniacs. As a matter of fact, many hid their self-loathing behind a mask identifying as outcasts, although there may have been a prima donna or two within the group. Pariahs or not, they were their own community, knit as tightly as a weaver's bridge, but with suppressed prejudice, underlying jealousy, and hypocritical mutuality, fearful of being utterly embraced or sung by anyone. The song remained the same, muted until this night when the genie was let out of the bottle like an avalanche of melodic notes too hard to grasp. The idiosyncrasies on this night would be threatening and murderous. No one was surprised because, in agreement, they drank the poison and embraced the duality of life and death, calling it the only pill left to swallow. Enough is never enough, and to quote the Arabian Nights entertainment, the more one has, the more one wants. This could mean fame, wealth, or amenities of various sorts. Before I'm able to continue the story, I have to explain something integral to the plot. I'm about to speak about darkness, Within the vast universe, or this confined casual party, there was an intimacy which did not stray from flirting with disaster, and darkness was all around. Looking into the auriferous cavities of darkness, it was impossible to see the idolin soul and how madness occupied the place where moral sense would be found. Only when darkness returned the gaze did one know they were looking into their own demise. Within the fathomless dark eyes, atrocious traps and snares were laid. But darkness could play the game, but without the rules, as it became the antithesis, grooming itself between good and evil in an Ouroboros fashion. Moreover, its eccentricity could not be considered anything other than strange. Some have found darkness to be an annoyance because no one could say when darkness was given birth. When did darkness cause blindness to the rich and poor? When did cosmos vortices begin to swirl? No one can say. Darkness is a god unto itself, feeding off fear, replacing the light. The shards and shadows huddle just outside of the circle of life, holding the mind hostage. As the default of the universe, there is darkness existing where no light is ever sullied. One cannot conceive the time when darkness encountered its first wandering soul, nor how, after that confrontation, the darkness expanded on alien modes within the malleable cloak of storms stemming from corporal and opaque curtains of inclemency that thereafter raged. The party was being held in a rather upscale apartment right smack dab in the center of the city on what should have been called the 13th floor, yet curiously it was named the 14th floor. The host was Constance, a 40-something-year-old woman with a striking face and unreadable smile who owned a remarkable Bombay black cat. The cat was infectious for some, unreserved, proving to be a social butterfly, playfully greeting each guest with a figure eight between the legs, around the ankles, purring and nuzzling without exception. Constance had been divorced twice and was now living off of a small inheritance and wealth gotten from divorce. This influx of unearned finances made her financially secure and afforded her the opportunity to host such gatherings. Constance needed to be seen once in a while for her own sanity. The first guests to arrive were art critic Larissa and her male companion Erik, whom she had never introduced before. They were dressed alike and could be adolescent twins in stiff, dull dress suits with unsightly wide vertical black and white stripes. They were connoisseurs and epicures, purported not to be a couple, but he clung to her like a baby chimpanzee. The next guests welcomed in were a lesbian couple, Tasman and Venetia. The pair had multifloral-colored hair, and in a paradoxical attachment, they were now speaking with fake English accents. This is called the Madonna syndrome, after the singer Madonna, whose accent changed throughout the years according to which era one would discover her. They were a physical convergence of similitude, but were dressed fundamentally inverse of one another. The couple were known in the art community more as enthusiasts, and some would say sybarites, because they could be found somewhere each night hobnobbing with the rich, the famous, or the gifted nymphet types. With extravagance, the ever-so-taciturn Kiyomi, a young, bald African-American, made her presence known in muted egress. Kiyomi was a known chef at a very popular restaurant in the city, and all of the guests would have eaten dishes that she had prepared before. She made her way into the corner where Tasman was handing Venetia a drink from the bar, where Constance was happily taking orders. Marlene was the next to arrive with a young woman who she introduced as Cordelia, her apprentice. Marlene was heavily influenced by the macabre and prided herself as one known to be drawn to occult studies. She was always ruminating, heavy in thought, and appeared to become offended if someone addressed her unexpectedly. Marlene was dressed in black, as one that would be in mourning for a dear friend, yet this was simply her fashion. Marlene seemed to be incumbent upon her apprentice to serve her as a professional aide might. Cordelia was given a stipend in money for this association, so she could hardly complain. Others arrived shortly thereafter, which made the spacious apartment a little cozier as the bodies slid in. All in all, Constance had invited about 15 people, and it appeared no one had declined the invitation. Larissa whispered to Erik with parted lips as if she was performing a ventriloquist routine, but he could barely hear her. Can you believe how unsentimental Kaomi has become? Erik looked Kaomi up and down. Ever since she got that head job as a chef, and more authority, she believes her self-importance in the restaurant somehow translates outside the kitchen. Erik sat cross-legged, hunched over with an elbow on the knee. The Bombay cat had snuck up on the pair, and Larissa looked down with distaste. Does everybody have a furball other than myself? Erik pushed the cat away, saying, They're like shedding machines. Constance observed the pushing away of the cat, and she left her bar duties to address Erik. Smiling diffidently, she asked Erik, Was the little fur baby bothering you? I'm so sorry. She's a glutton for affection. Indeed, she is. I have some mild allergies to indoor pets, Erik lied. Constance smiled cutely, scooped up the cat, and moved her away politely. She was never this jovial. Did she not have an introverted personality? Larissa remarked, making sure that she kept the volume of her voice under the radar. Erik scoffed and replied, If I were to conjecture or surmise, I would diagnose her as being on the spectrum. Oh, Erik, you're so funny. Cruel, but funny, Larissa said. The house smelled of secrets. Putrid miasma thickened among the guests as conversations grouped into corners of the rooms. All attention was drawn to Kaomi as she burst into unaccountable enthusiasm. Oh, she must have won the raffle. Erik demeaned her because he assumed he and his huddled minions had been left out. Do not let it rot your brain, Erik, my dear. Remember, she's only a cook in a kitchen with a simple mind. She would find anything amusing under the right circumstances. Larissa produced a vanilla vape pipe and inhaled. The Bombay cat was now being held by Constance, who was rubbing it as it purred contentedly. Tasman and her partner, Venetia, called out to Constance. They were sitting two to a single chair and wanted to see the cat. Oh, what a lovely kitty, Venetia remarked, wanting to stroke the cat, yet she hesitated. Does she like strangers? Tasman asked. Oh, she loves everybody, Constance decorously said. The girls both reached out to give the cat a pat. The cat lifted its chin and purred like a motor. What's her name? Venetia asked, completely hypnotized by the feline. Her name is Darkness, Constance answered. Darkness? That's a bold name. How did you arrive at that name? Tasman was intrigued. She's always been Darkness. Came to me already named. I did not name her, but since she's solid black, I could not think of a more befitting name, said Constance. Yes, I'd have to agree. I do not believe I've ever seen a cat with such perfect, unblemished fur before, Venetia noticed. Meanwhile, Marlene and Cordelia, sitting across the room, had not stopped staring at Darkness, who was beginning to fidget, so Constance placed the cat on the floor. The cat darted around the corner and disappeared. Did you see how suspiciously that cat was behaving? Marlene asked. Cordelia hung on Marlene's observation. I feel as estranged as Judas. Something is odd with that cat, Marlene said. Cordelia mused. Cats are spooky weird anyway, especially black cats. I've never been a cat person, and now that I think about it, I do not remember a time when I considered wanting a dog either. The same. Too much unnecessary responsibility, if you ask me, Marlene stated as fact. Music was coming through the entertainment center, and it was not feasible to whisper any longer. Marlene gave Cordelia a glance as if to say not to speak too loudly. Calvin Childers, an art collector and amateur filmmaker, had stood from the soft sofa where he'd been sitting with a group of like-minded, creative types to stretch his legs, because his perusal of his friends was complete, and the greater need was the toilet. Abnormally limping because his left leg had fallen asleep, he threaded through the guests. Some were now in dance mode, and he found the hallway that would lead him to relief. As he entered the hallway, the noise in the former room quickly became dull to his ears, as if someone had turned the volume down. He questioned himself if he needed to head back and investigate how the music had all but faded into nothingness, but he had committed to the hallway and kept going straight. He thought he was the only person in the hallway. It was narrow but ample enough for two people who might meet to pass one another cleanly. Unexpectedly, his attention was drawn to a figure standing where he assumed the toilet area was. Calvin, who was above average in height, noticed that the figure was a head taller than he was and was blurred due to the yellow hue of the light. He didn't know why he felt threatened. He stopped, and in a remonstrance with only the intention of showing authority, he addressed the unknown guest. "I've had too much to drink. I need to get in there." The form in the hallway took a step back as if to concede, but no words were exchanged. Calvin moved closer, and to his shock, this figure standing on the other side of the doorway leading into the bathroom was no man nor a woman. Rather, this entity was an enormous, hairy, horrid, impalpable simulacrum that was indefinable. There was no scream, no call for help, no struggle. Calvin experienced a brief moment of abject terror, and then was simply gone. All that remained were traces of blood on the floor and blood spatter up the walls, extending to the ceiling where specks of red clung. It was evidence of something diabolical. But with no body, nothing could be proven. It was as if he had been swallowed up alive by that which is indissolubly evil. Back in the main party room, no one was even aware that Calvin had left to visit the bathroom, so no one was the wiser, which meant there was no concern and no hunt to locate this irrecoverable partygoer. Darkness, the Bombay cat, had emerged from the shadows and had joined the others again, and she happily made her rounds, visiting with each group. Hardly anyone was mingling outside of their human pods, except to possibly bump into one another at the bar, as Constance gladly poured more drinks for her guests. Larissa and Erik had not moved from their perch, and were still having a private go at anyone they deemed unworthy of their approval. Oh, she's infantile. Just look at how she postures herself. Larissa was speaking about Kiyomi still, whom she had taken a disliking to, having only just met her recently at another party. She's young and rude and lewd, laughed Erik. I find most young people inexorably uncouth, unable to change until they get some mileage on them, and have gone through the dramas and tragedies that we all have to suffer through to reach adulthood. There's a price to be paid for maturity, Larissa said once again, inhaling the vanilla vape and fogging her side of the room up with the smoke. The two of them had sat for so long they were inert when they attempted to raise from their laid-back seats. Erik had to give Larissa a hand and dragged her up clumsily, for Erik was a 90-pound weakling. "That was a mission," Larissa said. "I know where the toilet is. Follow me," Erik said. They danced their way awkwardly, stiff-legged, and with knotted lower backs across the invented dance floor. Together, they started down the hallway, both in desperate need of the toilet. "You go first. I might pee on the seat," Erik laughed vulgarly. "I will not argue with you. I really need to go," Larissa said as she pressed her thighs together and shuffled into the bathroom. Erik stood waiting his turn. He'd drunk several drinks and was a little unbalanced because of this state of intoxication. The noise that he heard after Larissa closed the door caused him a stunted reaction. He delayed so unfavorably that by the time his perennial fear had observed the venerable assault of something far greater and ancient than he could identify, Only then did he realize that his head was inside of something darker than the Stygian cloud-covered sky. Without an extended tribulation, Erik was engulfed by that which feeds on flesh, and he was gone from his watch by the door. Larissa finally emerged and never noticed any imminent danger lurking, only a few feet away in the dark shadows. She would have normally been livid that Erik had left her without saying a word, or even knocking on the door, but because she placed her hand on the door casing and felt something wet and sticky, she could see clearly from the bathroom light that it was blood. The first thought was not, poor Erik, what happened to poor Erik? Her first impression was, how gross is this? And she hoped that she was not contaminated with the diseased blood. She returned to the toilet and washed her hands with soap and hot water thoroughly. It practically made her sick, but the illness that came next was the interminable fear that seized her unaware. Something eventually clicked in her mind and she realized something horrible had happened. She did not feel a great shame in being scared, but she did slam the door shut and lock it. She paced the bathroom floor, soliloquizing, wondering what she could do. She had never been described as a nervous person, but she had never been this disjointed mentally before either. She could hear something moving and brushing along the walls of the hallway. It was as if a large animal was breathing obnoxiously against the door. Moving closer to the door with complete caution, she slowly reached out and barely touched the frame with her fingertips. Whatever was on the other side must have sensed her movement, because a violent raking sound was heard, like multiple knives being dragged across a wooden table. Frightened beyond human possibility, she recoiled in a defensive posture, but she had no weapon with which to defend herself. She dug in her handbag for her cell phone. Instead of dialing emergency services, she found the number Constance had given out when inviting guests to the party. It rang once, twice, and before the third ring, Constance's voice answered. Hello? With a quivering voice and hand shaking, Larissa whispered into the phone. I need help. I'm sorry, we're having a party and the music's loud. Can you speak a little louder, please? Constance, it's me, Larissa. Help me. I'm trapped in your bathroom. There's something outside of the door. Larissa, is that you? Constance sounded genuinely surprised. Yes, help me. I am amazed, Larissa. Constance had an air of uncertainty to her tone. Amazed at what? I'm here, in deep trouble, and Erik's gone, she replied. I'm amazed you were able to phone me. Darkness usually does not play with her food this long. There was a purring outside the door that sounded like a kitten. There was a tramp and patter of scurrying feet back and forth, as if the cat was chasing something up and down the hallway. The phone call disconnected. It's just a little cat, that's all, Larissa convinced herself. It's a joke, a game. Not funny, she said as she rested her hand on the doorknob. Her inexplicable trepidation was like a yoke around her thin neck. I must be brave. I must be vigilant, as she watched with unblinking awareness. Her hand turned the doorknob. When she opened the door, it opened to a carnal pollutant of decay, and she cried out in dread and regret that she trusted her intuition. On any other occasion, she would have made the correct choice, but when she realized that the lights were no longer yellow in the hallway, but had turned a saffron glow, she realized that it was actually her blood changing the ambient color. With a splinter of a moment, she was hungrily ingested whole, leather purse, Prada shoes and all. Marlene, the occultist, and her callow protege, Cordelia, had been content, sitting idle, observing the room carefully. There's a dark spirit here tonight. I don't like it, Marlene stated. The probabilities for something hideous are ripe. There's too much booze and drugs for my liking, Cordelia said. I think it's more wicked than that. This room feels like it's heavy with adamantine chains upon it, and every set of lips has become putrescent with suspicion. Marlene stood to get some blood flow to her lower body. "Do you want to leave?" Cordelia asked. "I'm not sure. We're not dealing with necromancy or paranormal activities here. This is something tangible. I can sense it. I just do not know what it is," Marlene said. She eyed the room, taking mental notes, and then she realized as something bleak deep inside her chilled her coldly with a painful winteriness. "Looks like we're missing some guests." "Who?" Cordelia asked. With keen austerity, Marlene answered, "I no longer see that scarcely visible revulsion of a man Calvin Childers. I saw him head toward the bathroom earlier, but he never emerged. And likewise, those tumultuous art critics, the pugnacious Larissa and her sidekick Erik, the flamboyant, they also went that direction without returning." Just as that moment, Constance came seemingly out of nowhere, holding darkness gently in her arms. "How are you enjoying the party?" "I've been to less intolerable parties in my day. Too bad the weather was not nice enough to be outdoors," Marlene answered in her usual disordered way. "I'm going to bring out some finger food if anyone's hungry," Constance informed the pair. "After all of this alcohol, I'll be surprised if anyone's digestion can handle food. The malaise of spirits ingested already could sink a ship. The finger foods should have been earlier, my love, but if you have a sausage on a stick, I would happily devour one," Marlene said credulously, as if the film of a movie production was rolling. "Excellent," Constance said as darkness licked its lips and purred happily. Although upbeat music was playing and people were dancing uninhibited and drinking observantly, Marlene felt the weight of pall over the apartment, and she feared it might soon spread into the guests as well. The consumption of spirits had been a free-flowing delight, and some people were chilling out while others, intoxicated, were raising their voices unnecessarily. Marlene was completely done with the intolerable childishness around her and this disquieting, unseen force she felt. She told Cordelia not to have anything else to drink and to sober up as quickly as possible. Constance emerged from the kitchen with her hospitality face alight and dispersed trays of assorted bread, cheeses, and dips to the guests. Tasman and Venetia were more than ready to enjoy a bite. They'd been the two main dancers of the night, showing off their moves, and had worked up quite the appetite. Marlene asked Tasman quietly, "Have you been paying attention to what has been going on tonight? Or have you been too busy getting your groove thing on?" The question sounded rude and somewhat harsh, but Tasman knew of Marlene's deprecating mannerisms and oftentimes stalwart approach to conversation. "Thank you for noticing our moments on the dance floor, but no, I've come to have a good time, not to analyze the room for ghosts and shadows either," she answered. "Your indefinable dance routine may have been replaced by indefinable fears soon. I'm only giving you fair warning. Something is broadly off tonight," Marlene said. "You didn't check your crystal ball before coming tonight? I thought it was imperative for those dabbling in the dark arts to do so before venturing out. If you'd done so, then you would have avoided the party altogether," Tasman said. "No, I would have attended nevertheless. I'm a woman of indomitable spirit, thus I'm right where I need to be," Marlene confidently boasted. It was at that point Mitchell Wilson, who boasted himself as a one-man acting troupe, who had put on a couple of unsuccessful shows in his day, stumbled, obviously inebriated, up to Marlene. As obnoxious as he smelled, Marlene didn't want to be rude or unkind to such a pathetic creature, so she obliged his attention and asked, "Mitchell, long time no see. I hope you're well." With slurred viscosity of words and visibly panting as a man in the early stages of emphysema, Mitchell laughed and dismally announced, "I am not having a very good time tonight." "It's because you're swimming in your own decay," Marlene laughed back. "Listen, are you a witchy person, right? You feel things, see dead people and whatnot, right?" Marlene didn't answer. She simply looked into his old, watery eyes with sadness. He tried to enthrall her. "Well, tell me something. Do you have any utterly brilliant spells for my love life? Or am I simply cursed under these omens for something I have done wrong or maybe not done right? I fear that I'm trapped in the inclemencies of frigid subterranean existence. Marlene did not like this distraction, but she didn't see any reason to make his night worse, so she improvised an answer to suffice him. Mitchell, I'm getting the sense of a man with immeasurable talent, with untapped significant potential, who needs not ride the waves of emotion or the coattails of others. Dream on, sober up, take a shower. Tomorrow's your day, notwithstanding if you survive the night. I suggest the cheese and crackers, she advised, and then, taking Cordelia by the hand, she went to the water jug to quench her thirst and get some food in her system. Colluding together, Marlene with Cordelia trailing right on her heels, set themselves up in an unoccupied corner so they had a clear view of the room along with the hallway. Meanwhile, as they sat with an entire tray of savories in front of them, drinking only water now, darkness surprised them by laying at their feet and rolling around, stretching playfully for attention. Cordelia revisited the earlier conversation. Where do you think the others went off to? That's what I'm trying to surmise. The peculiarities seem to be immense. I'm also missing a couple of others I saw earlier tonight, and now they're nowhere at all. I haven't seen anyone leave through the front door, that much I'm sure of, Marlene stated. Darkness suddenly leapt up onto its paws, as cats unpredictably do, and jetted from the room into the dimly lit hallway. Marlene noticed Mitchell stumbling along and heading in the same direction the darkness had gone. Obviously, Mitchell was desperate for a toilet. Believing that Mitchell may be headed into precariously undesirable consequences, Marlene suggested they follow him to the restroom so that he returned on his own accord. As soon as they entered the hallway together, both were abnormally quickened by an unexplained, grievous fear, intensified by the uncomfortable feeling of being watched. The dreadful vividness that ensued only served to intensify the unmanageable, grievous fear, and neither could explain the acute monstrosities of pervade doom and gloom. This is weird, Cordelia said, her youthful eyes wide open. I don't like this. Where'd he go? Marlene could not figure out how Mitchell, who could barely walk on his own, simply disappeared and was gone, vanished from the hallway without a trace. Maybe ducked into one of these rooms by mistake, Cordelia offered. Maybe. She tried the first door, but it was locked. Together they tried a couple more doors on their way to the bathroom, but the doors were all locked. Maybe he's faster than he looks, Cordelia said. Oh, that's very doubtful, Marlene said as she began to turn her horn amulet around her neck. She always wore a protection charm. The red horn amulet derived from the cornucopia, which was originally a goat horn filled with gold and precious stones to ward off the evil eye. She twisted it with her fingers, hoping it was powerful enough to protect them. Some party, huh? Cordelia dismally said. This one's on my list of ones to avoid in the future, Marlene swore. The two came to the toilet without seeing a single soul, but they did immediately see the bloodbath on the walls, floor, and ceiling, and then their attention was drawn to the door with its horrific deep grooves which had been scratched into the wood. My God, what could have done this? Cordelia asked. We need Almighty God for this. This is despicable bad magic, the type that will incapacitate even the best of good magic. Blood with no bodies. Where are the bodies? Something cold touched Marlene's imagination vividly, like premonition, and she shuddered from the implanted thoughts. Run! Go! 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 She pushed Cordelia back up the hallway toward the party in a hurried rush. Perilous mesmerisms flashed like light bulbs exploding in their minds, never actually exposing the true scene. It was inadvisable to give in to this incoherent phenomenon. The snapshot vision showed appurtenances within a room of untold horrors, cauldrons of black sludge, white bleached human skulls and devilish sacrilegious absurdities. The vision, beyond the focus of common man, would not let loose of them. The hallway was infinitely longer than they remembered. Undeterred by the inconvenience and unknown probabilities, they sprinted soberly and swiftly from an abhorrence of infernal illusion they had not even seen. But the blood, the volumes of blood that they saw, only had one explanation: murder. Extraordinarily cheerless, cold-blooded, unspeakable murder. The two ran back into the thumping sounds of the party, but there was not a single soul dancing. There was an empty room with only Constance sitting in a lounge chair, holding Darkness on her lap. Less than ecstatic, Darkness was curled up, behaved, but had her head raised. Constance used the remote and killed the tumultuous music. The instant silence made the room feel much smaller than it was. Your cat has done something devious, Cordelia accused. Do you mean this adorable, unequaled beast? Constance asked as Darkness began licking its paws clean. Then the cat purred with an amplification and a tone no different than the sound of an augury of death. What's going on here, Constance? What do you want? Marlene unsympathetically asked. Marlene, in her time, had delved in some darker things herself, but murder was not something she had ever considered. Something is wrong in this house, very wrong, Cordelia said, staring directly into Darkness's eyes. Be it as it may, there's something wrong in the world in general, but you do not see Darkness and I making wild accusations. We had a party, you were invited, you attended. You did not enjoy yourselves, and that makes us sad, Constance said as a reminder. What happened to Calvin and the others? Cordelia asked. Constance smiled sardonically and then quoted a Bible verse. It is appointed once for a man to die, then there is judgment. Stop talking nonsense and tell us what you want, Marlene continued with a twist of her horn charm around her neck, wishing it possessed the power of decimation. But respectively, it was a mere charm of inconsequential substance. Knowing it not to be true, Constance said insatiably, Very good, very good. Your amulet is powerful. Darkness hissed at Marlene with a sibilant disgust. It brought the women a chill of uneasy feelings. You see, Darkness entered my life unannounced like a treasure, and in no time I became her apprentice or apprentice. I thought at first I had a new pet, but then when she insistently opened up to me, I guess roles changed, and now I serve Darkness. Arlene could not believe what she was hearing. Darkness glared fiendishly at her, but deep down she believed and hoped that the amulet she wore had saved her and Cordelia. Her flesh still prickled with cold at the inflection of the purring. You're angry because you cannot stop us from leaving, Marlene boldly assumed. You are very exacting, and that's the reason you are free to leave. Your amulet is a nice party favor, but it possesses no magic. Darkness is no longer hungry, so I would suggest that we do not meet again under any circumstances, else you may find that your fate will be like others when Darkness is hungry, Constance advised garishly. Marlene and Cordelia began to edge their way to the door, their nerves on edge, their hearts were racing, but easing with each step. When they reached the door, they turned away from Constance and Darkness, but when they pulled the door, it would not open. Marlene gave it a hard jerk once, twice, but the door was firmly shut. Constance laughed faintly. Now the story is finished, and you might ask, how is it that I know so much about what happened at that party? Truth be known, I am Darkness.
It's a rare day in a county like this one when an officer of the law can just sit back, put up his feet, and pale to chrysanthemum. And before you tell me I meant sail to Byzantium, let me remind you of something. See, I've been High Sheriff of Splittail for over 20 years now, so you can bet I know my poetry just as well as anyone. Thank you very much, and I didn't mean sell to Byzantium at all. And I know my botany too, which is why I was having Deputy Dingle take Pell to my chrysanthemums. A rare day indeed. This wasn't to say, of course, that the deputy and I weren't on duty. As the great luminary of this prominent county, I'm on call 25/8, an omniscient, omnipresent agent of law and order. The way I see things, that lady holding the scales of justice must be drunker than Mr. Laundry, because God knows they never do stop wobbling. Now that I think about it, they'd probably stay a lot more steady if she took off that blindfold. Anyway, if it sounds to you like an awful heavy load to shoulder, being the High Sheriff of Splittail during times as turbulent as this, let me assure you it is. But to whom much is given, much is expected. And that's why Deputy Dingle had to do my yard work for me, while I relaxed a little bit and had some lemonade.
Undamn dignified.
The radio was quiet for the time being, and the supply of hinkiness seemed to have fallen below the threshold of demand. A mild day by any interpretation. The only sounds to be heard were the morning birds, the ice in my glass, and Dingle sneezing and complaining. Now, I know better than to suggest that law and order had finally prevailed. Even the chrysanthemum bush knows better than that. It's only to say the legions of darkness were pausing to regroup for the moment, to sharpen their swords, to polish their rods and whatnot, maybe even have a glass of lemonade or water their own chrysanthemums. Don't forget those over there, Deputy.
Over where?
Right there, I said. I pointed to the forsythia bush just behind them. Sometimes, Dingle, I'd swear you couldn't water your own ass without me to help you.
Why the hell I gotta do this anyway, Sheriff? You know I got allergies. And why you gotta sit there in your underwear to watch me?
Well, normally I'd just point to my badge and remind him exactly why that was. But all I had on this instance were the, essentials. Just enough to make myself presentable before the Lord. Well, Deputy, to answer your questions in order, my plants need watering, and tan lines are unbecoming. In fact, I've only got these on for a place to hang my radio. And to be polite, of course. Speaking of which, it'd be awful polite for you to fill my lemonade glass when you're done with mine. And it was just then that they made their move. Not the chrysanthemums, they always stay put, but the legions of darkness. And it seemed my leisure time was quickly coming to an end.
Unit 1. Come in, Unit 1.
What is it, Frankie? I'm working on my tan.
We're getting complaints of a smell coming from the McAllen's place.
A smell? You telling me a smell is against the law? Is there even a radio code for that, Frankie?
I don't believe there is one for a smell, sir.
Well, say old Lady McAllen's baking cookies. Is that any reason to mobilize the forces of law enforcement? Because the last time I checked, Frankie, this was America.
I understand the smell is objectionable, sir.
Objectionable? Well, not everyone likes cookies, Frankie. Is that any reason to go making a hoo-ha?
I don't believe it's cookies, sir.
Well, goddamn.
Something about a hoo-ha, Sheriff?
Oh, the McAllen place is supposed to be emitting some kind of objectionable aroma, Deputy.
Don't they have like 1 million cats over there?
Well, I understand the lady of the house is an aficionado of sorts, but there's no law against that, is there, Dingle?
Not that I'm aware of, Sheriff. No worse than sitting in your damn underwear while your deputy does the—
Unit 1.
Copy that, I said. If it is cookies, Frankie, you can consider me 10-6 until further notice, because for one thing, that's a substantial redirection of resources. And for another, I like cookies, and you can bet I'll be having a few myself. Do you copy?
Copy that, Sheriff.
I hung the radio back on my underwear strap and lay back for one last minute of sun. I had a good idea Byzantium was further away than I thought.
Just can't imagine why you'd want so many cats. Yolanda's neighbor's got one. I swear I could be lying in her bed and allergic from all the way next door.
I drained my lemonade. Well, I didn't know that about you, Deputy.
That I'm allergic to cats?
That she allowed you in her bed. Frankly, I'm appalled.
Will the indignities ever cease?
A little mourning dove landed on my fence post and took a shit. Then it made that funny sound they make and flew away. Not too polite, if you ask me. But things like that I tend to take as a sign. There's no such thing as coincidences in this world. Now, the way I see it, everything happens for a reason. I got to my feet and kind of reoriented my underwear for upright mobility. Well, let's get a move on, Dingle. Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. Now, where to put my keys? Dingle just stood there for a second.
You gonna get dressed, Sheriff?
Well, surely I considered it, but there were two things that had me leaning the other way. For one thing, the greasy suntan lotion I had all over me did not play well with polyester. And next, the possibility there'd be nothing too bad going on. Most likely I'd send Dingle to the door to check, and we'd head right back here and get undressed again. Not Dingle, I mean. No one needs to see that. Yolanda does maybe, but sure as hell not me. Now, Deputy, we'll just take a little ride. See the sights, smell the smells. The garden can wait, Dingle, don't you worry. 'Tis an unweeded garden. Dingle shook his head. You know, from time to time, I'd almost sense him losing his zest for police work. Almost. But our yoke is a heavy load to shoulder. Even the greatest luminaries among us will occasionally grow weary. Not me, of course, but, well, you get the idea. We pulled up to the McAllens around a half an hour later, after a quick stop by the 7-Eleven for provisions. The slushy kept sliding around in my thighs, and the hot dog tasted like suntan lotion. But the minute I lowered the window to toss out the cardboard hot dog thing, I noted there was indeed an objectionable smell in the air. Dingle did too, and that was plain to see by his cartoonish-looking Adam's apple, just bobbing up and down like it wanted back on the tree.
That sure ain't cookies, Sheriff.
Well, careful you don't toss your own, Dingle. That's just undignified to go wasting a hot dog like that. I had a look up at the door. 3 cats looking back over their little tin food cans. Another one pacing the porch with its tail flicking around like it was trying to shake something loose. Another in the yard with only one ear and its 2 back legs, bouncing around like a retarded bunny rabbit. Well, go ahead there, Dingle. Investigate.
You ain't even gonna come with me?
Well, damn, Deputy. I ain't even got my war suit on. That'd be plain unprofessional.
I told you to get dressed, Sheriff.
Oh, I see. Now you're the one giving the orders. It's the inmates running the asylum. The hens running the hen house. God help us all. It's cats and dogs living together.
Speaking of cats, Sheriff, all that cat hair's gonna kill me. I was hoping I could stand back a bit and let you do the talking.
I sat there playing with my mustache a minute, just going through my catalog of leadership tactics. You know, if there's just one thing I've learned in all my years as a luminary, it's this. Sometimes a fella needs to be reminded just who he is. Not me, of course, but other fellas. Dingle, I ever tell you how proud I am to have you as my deputy? Being so brave and heroic as you are, so rugged and manly and downright gallant, it brings a tear to my eye sometimes just to think about it. How I'm just about the most downright goddamn luckiest sheriff there ever was. It's providential, Dingle. I mean, when you really stop and give it a real good thinky. Good gracious, you must have come right down from heaven. The 2-legged cat stopped bouncing for a second and kind of leaned on its face in the grass.
You mean it, Sheriff?
I'm surprised at you, Dingle. Here I am pouring my heart out, and you still doubt me. Let me tell you something. As sure as I've shed my vestments and lain bare my soul, I can think of no better man to investigate this matter than you. He sat there soaking it in for a minute, basking in the adulation, or stilling himself maybe. Already little cat hairs floated in through the open window and landed on my greasy physique. I went ahead and rolled up the window. No need to get dirty. Today, yours truly was administration only. Thusly, I sweetened the deal. I say you go ahead and clear the air like only a man like you can, and after that, we head to Splittail Taco and shut that bastard down. On me, deputy. I'm talking 10 crunchy tacos and large drinks. Affirmative.
All right, Sheriff. I'm going in.
I thrust out my mustache and gave the deputy a pat on the leg before he got out of the car. I figured in just a minute or two he'd be back holding some cat carcass by the tail. He could dangle it out the window while we went, and we'd maybe fling it off somewhere in Cooter, where it stinks anyway. Justice restored. I leaned back in the seat and watched Dingle navigate the minefield of cats. The retarded one just stopped to look at an old lawnmower and just stood there for a second with its one ear folded back. Then it turned around and started hopping the other way. Old Lady McAllen opened the door after a while, and you could practically see the stench hit Dingle. He wobbled a little bit, scared a few cats away in the process, but I was proud to see him compose himself. By the look on Mrs. McAllen's face, she must not have noticed the smell at all. She might very well have been baking cookies in the midst of it. Dingle went inside, and I turned on the radio for a little music. Allowed myself a little glance up at the photo still clipped to the visor. Dearest summer sausage, my old flame. The proverbial one that got away. I wondered how she was getting along up there in Schenectady, with all the city people, and the handheld video games and the panini machines and whatnot. Yeah, sure, I'd tried looking her up on the computer, but with a name like Summer Sausage, you mostly turn up pictures of just that. No questions answered, and it only leaves me feeling hungry. When you really stop to think about it, the whole damn thing is like some cruel metaphor for life. She'd gone up there to be in the movies 10 long years ago. I haven't seen any movie with her in it, but to be honest, I haven't seen many movies to begin with. I guess different people have different ideas about what's fulfilling to them. Some people spend their days watching TV and picking their nose, and others don't have time to do either one. Some people watch actors playing roles, and others choose instead to play real roles. I'll tell you from my own experience, some people would rather play a sheriff's wife on TV than wake up a real one every morning. To each his own, I suppose. Country life just doesn't cut the mustard with some folks. And with a name like she has, I guess mustard is pretty important to her. Now, I'm not saying I'd never set foot in the great white north of Schenectady, but with all their gadgets and Game Boys and whatnot, God knows you'll never catch me slandering an inch of this great country. But to throw away my birthright, toss aside my divine purpose like so much cat shit, I'll tell you what, I'd sooner lay my prick in a panini press. That's to say, I'd already made up my mind. Maybe I was born to walk alone, like a drifter or something. A heart in need of rescue. Just waiting for love's goddamn charity. Lord knows where I'd found the strength to carry on. But I'll tell you what, a man with any guts at all is just bound to get kicked in them. Speaking of which, the deputy came spilling out the door just like someone had kicked him in the guts. And out came the hot dog right there on the porch steps. Well, here we go again, I said. I got out of the car and hurried over to the porch. I barely made it there in time to steady him before he went over the railing. What is it, deputy?
The cats. The stink.
Well, goddamn. I only remembered at that moment I was still in my underpants when I saw Mrs. McAllen standing there looking at me. At first I thought she was blushing, but the longer I looked, that was just her makeup. Beside that, she looked kinda pale, honestly. Morning there, Mrs. McAllen.
Mr. Sheriff? Why are you in your drawers?
Never mind, I said. I was just getting dressed when I sensed Dingle here teetering, and came right away. But enough about that. How you been? How's the mister?
What's that now? Speak up, Sheriff.
How's the mister?
Oh, Wesley? Oh, and you never know with Wesley. Never mind him. What's wrong with this one? He got the coronavirus or something?
No, he's just fine. Must have been something he ate, 'cause there's nothing at all objectionable about this nice lady's home, right, Dingle? 'Cause even to suggest such a thing would be downright uncouth. Ain't that right, Deputy? Ain't that just as right can get?
Right you are, Sheriff.
Oh, well, that's fine. So what brings you gentlemen here today? Mr. Dingle says there's something about a smell in the area? Now, my senses aren't what they used to be, but I haven't noticed anything myself. Oh, I'm sorry. I've forgotten my manners. Come on inside, boys. I'll fix you some lemonade.
Very nice of you, ma'am. After you, Dingle. Dingle regarded me unkindly for a moment, but I gave him my mustache look again to remind him how gallant he was. Now, I'm not sure the deputy is precisely as rugged or as manly as I accused him of being earlier, but if there's one thing I've learned in all my law enforcement experience, it's this. We rise ourselves by lifting others. Dingle had told me old lady McAllen was supposed to have had 1,000,000 cats. Well, if that were the truth, they were all accounted for right there in the front room. And to be honest, it might have been closer to 2,000,000. Tails sticking up everywhere. Some of them walking around, others curled into great piles. The floor was basically one big food dish, and there was a big basin full of water where in a normal house you'd typically find a TV set. Dingle's eyes were starting to water. His face looked a little swollen, too, now that I noticed it.
You boys make yourselves comfortable while I go fetch some lemonade. Fuckstick, shit dick, numbnuts. Make room for the guests.
She shooed a few cats off a partially buried couch.
You two, nutsack. Butt fuck, get.
Those are some colorful names, Mrs. McAllen, I said.
What's that now? Speak up now, Sheriff. I can't hear my ass from my elbow.
I said, some colorful names, ma'am.
Oh, you run out of regular ones after a while. Tit fuck, butt plug, Charlie, get!
She brushed a few more cats aside and made space for us to sit down. There was so much fur on the couch it might as well have been a whole cat itself. The minute I sat down, there were 3 new cats on my lap, even more on Dingle's. A sneeze sent 2 of them scattering, but more moved in to take their place. I could hear Mrs. McAllen filling glasses in the other room.
Bitch ass, dick tits, get! This ain't for you.
I feel like my heart's gonna explode, Sheriff.
Aw, Dingle, there's no reason to get sentimental. Mrs. McAllen returned shortly with 2 glasses of lemonade and handed them to us. There was a whisker in mine, so I put it between 2 cats on the coffee table and regarded the old gal. So you mentioned your senses aren't what they used to be, Mrs. McAllen. How about the man of the house? How are his senses holding up?
Oh, Wesley? Well, I really can't say about him. He hasn't told me one way or the other.
Is he around by any chance?
Oh, he's here one day, gone the next. You never can tell when... Pig shit, get the hell off a fucko. Last thing we need is more cats. Damn it. Sorry, Mr. Sheriff.
Quite all right. So you say Mr. McAllen's in and out a lot of the time?
What's that now?
Wesley, you say he's in and out?
Oh, Wesley's always been a free spirit. He comes and goes. I've grown accustomed to... Dillhole, stop fucking with Buttnut. I've gotten used to it, I suppose. So busy with the cats, I barely have time to... Shit, bastard! The litter's right goddamn there!
So he himself never complained about an aroma of any kind? Mrs. McAllen appeared to mull that one over a minute.
You know what? I just can't remember. My memory's not much better than my hearing these days. Can't remember my ass from my elbow.
You sure do remember a whole lot of cat names, ma'am.
Well, that's for them. Fuckwad, damn it. I tell you, that one's always going bug shit. Ooh, that's another good one.
I stood then, noted my legs were so covered in cat hair, I practically had pants on now. Dingle's face looked like he had stuck it in a bee's nest. Well, in any case, Mrs. McAllen, the deputy and I are going to have to take a little look around just to rule out any potential aromas coming from here. Now, for the life of me, I can't picture how or why that might be the case. But this way, when someone calls me up and says something smells, I can tell them, well, Mister, it sure as heck ain't the McAllen's household. 'Cause I was just there myself, and it was just as fresh and clean as a daisy.
Daisy dipped in shit,
Dingle muttered. Dingle, I'm surprised at you.
I'm gonna die, Sheriff. I think I see Jesus right now.
Well, God bless you, Mr. Deputy. Have some nice lemonade. Fart face, get.
She batted away a cat pawing at the rim of Dingle's glass. Oh, I'll take mine on the way out. You too, Deputy?
I don't know if I'm gonna make it out, Sheriff.
That's my deputy, always modeling. Well, don't mind us, Mrs. McAllen. We're just gonna have a little looky.
Say you want a cookie? I can make cookies.
No, ma'am. I said we're gonna have a little look around, that's all. You just get back to your kitty cats. You won't even know we're here.
You're queer?
Here. I said you won't even know we're here.
Oh, well, I suppose that's all right. You boys go ahead and do what you gotta. Fucko, settle down. You wanna live outside like two legs?
While the lady of the house tended to her hoard, Dingle and I inspected the premises. The house looked at one time to have been carpeted, but only shreds of evidence remained poking out from under the skirtboards. A Rubenesque specimen of cat filled the entire kitchen sink, and a runty one luxuriated on it like a feather pillow, lapping at the perpetually dripping faucet. 3 others curled up in an empty pizza box watched me defensively like they were expecting me to judge them for it. Dingle kind of wobbled along behind me, just sniffing and sneezing like someone had sprayed him with Agent Orange. Since most of the houses around here were just the same, I knew my way around the corners before I even got to them. The main difference between this house and the next one was precisely what Dingle had noticed. The cats. The stink. Now, a certain amount of the latter could accompany so many of the former, but there was something else underneath it all. The kind of stink that slows a man in his steps, perks the ears up, gets the pupils dilated, puts a deep crease right between a man's eyebrows. The kind of stink that'll make you suddenly aware of your prostate. The stench of death. Follow your nose, Deputy. I expect we'll find a dead one somewhere. We'll give it an honorable burial at the Cooter County Cop Shop, I'm thinking. Maybe stuff it in the mailbox for those jackasses, and that'll be the end of that.
I think it's gonna be the end of me, Sheriff.
Well, goddamn, Dingle. Maybe it's just you raising the stink this whole time.
I'm allergic, Sheriff. This has got to be against the Geneva Convention.
Deputy, if there's one thing I've learned in all my years of law enforcement, it's this. Sometimes police work just ain't all that conventional.
Well, forget following my nose. My nose hadn't worked since the living room.
Well, damn, I said. But I suppose it's like anything else. Not everyone has a nose for police work like yours truly. The pantry door hung open, and intermittent on every shelf were cats and boxes of macaroni. A mangy-looking kitty at the bottom stretched out in an open bag of flour. By the look of it, the flour also doubled as a litter box. Beyond that was a little hallway, and the cats went up and down it like city traffic. One heavily pregnant cat had ensconced itself on a pile of old laundry and lay there on her side with her legs sticking straight out. She meowed us both a good morning.
Shit stick, out of the microwave.
The half-bath in the hall had no door to it, and a 2x4 wedged in the jamb held in that much litter. The whole room was full of it, made mountainous with clumps of cat turds. The toilet must have been shut off because it was full, bowl and tank, both with cat food. A couple tabbies sat perched on the rim, eating, with their tails twitching contentedly. God damn, I told Dingle. These bastards are living the life of Riley.
No dead one, Sheriff?
Not a one. And to be honest, I can't say whether we're getting any closer or further from it. What do you think, Deputy? I turned to look at him then, and kinda wish I hadn't. His face looked like a depressurized sea creature.
I'm seeing stars, Sheriff. I gotta get out of here soon.
Well, look harder, Dingle. We gotta be getting close. This ain't the Taj Mahal, you know. Dingle and I proceeded into the bedroom. 1,000 iridescent eyes turned our way. While the typical stink was strong as ever, each one appeared among the living. I got on my knees by the bed and lifted the dust ruffle. A Siamese fella under there hissed at me. Beg your pardon.
Oh, shit!
When I turned to look at the deputy, he had a cat stuck to his face. It must have jumped on him from the bookshelf. Looked to be on there pretty good. Dingle started spinning and knocked over a floor lamp. The cat started doing that scratchy thing with its back feet and popped his collar right open. Deputy, watch the jugular! I considered shooting the attacker just then, but there were a few problems with that idea. First, I had no gun to shoot it with, and second, it was on Dingle's face. But before I could come up with a new idea, Mrs. McAllen came to the rescue.
Fuckstain, bad kitty.
She whapped Dingle's head with a spatula, and the cat went skittering off under the bed.
I'm sorry, boys. Fuckstain's a bit of a dickbag. Ooh, that's another good one.
Dingle, you all right?
Where is he? Let me out, the little prick.
No, Deputy, settle down now. No harm done. You're just fine. I straightened the deputy's collar for him, noting his neck looked a little like the Devil's Tower.
I'm gonna asphyxiate, aren't I, Sheriff?
No. I didn't think so anyway. But a more troubling matter was that we'd been through the entire house now, and we were no closer to what we'd been looking for. Complaining neighbors are one thing. They'll always find something to complain about. But failure, that's another thing entirely. After getting up out of my lawn chair and coming all this way, that was a pretty tough pill to swallow. In fact, I'd rather lay my prick in the panini press. Mrs. McAllen, at the risk of a minor uncouthness, I'm gonna have to level with ye for a minute. The deputy and I suspect one of your cats may have passed away. And though we keep searching for an answer, we can't seem to find what we're looking for. Now, granted Dingle has the strength to carry on, I ask you, is there anywhere in this house we might have missed?
Well, damn,
she said.
I'm a murder suspect?
No, ma'am, that's not it at all. A cat will die on its own from time to time. Sure as neighbors will be petty now and again. I figure the easiest way to clear the air between you and your neighbors is to locate the source of this passed-on cat and give it the dignified burial it deserves. Rainbow Bridge and all that.
Say again?
Ma'am, is there anywhere in this house we haven't looked yet?
The basement. You've been in the basement?
Well, goddamn. I didn't know there was a basement. Show me the way, Mrs. McAllen. You with me, Deputy? The scratches on Dingle's neck had each blown into swollen red welts.
Maybe I could go wait in the car, Sheriff?
Dingle, that's not very gallant of you. Haven't I ever told you how rugged and manly you are?
Our Father, who art in heaven.
Basement's over this way, gentlemen. Haven't been down there for years. Not since my knees stopped bending right. Shit balls, get!
The basement door was an inconspicuous little door. It was easy to miss. Once she cracked it, however, it was pretty clear we were right over the target. The smell billowing out like the entrance to hell. And I've never been more aware of my prostate than I was just then. Good God, Mrs. McAllen. If this ain't the problem we're looking for, I believe it's a worse one.
Say again, Sheriff?
I lifted a hand to dismiss her, then waved Dingle to come down with me. Then I changed my mind and had him go first. A little ways down, I hit a light switch and a dim bulb went on. The moment it did, you could hear the skittering critters and insects down there run for cover. The stench was so thick, I was worried it would soak into my mustache and stay there. And it got even worse the lower we went. A stink so bad, it was heavier than air.
Not feeling so hot, Sheriff.
Oh, Deputy, now's not the time to be so self-conscious. Keeping a handful of his shirt the whole time in case he started teetering again, I followed Dingle down the stairs until we got to the bottom. And once I stepped onto the cement, it was all pretty clear, the source of this olfactory dilemma. Only it wasn't a cat's eyes staring back at me like I expected.
Oh, thank heavens. I thought you'd never show up. Gee whiz, what year is it? Why are you in your drawers?
Well, goddamn. It was old Wesley McAllen, sitting right there in the corner between the water heater and the wall. By the look of him, I guessed he'd been sitting there a long time. First off, he looked like he hadn't had a shave or a bath in months. Second, he had no legs. The lower parts of him, anyway. Just blackened, festering stumps at the knees.
Jesus, Sheriff.
Dingle didn't look much better than McAllen's legs. He was wobbling like we were on the high seas. Dingle? A little mal de mer?
He all right?
McAllen asked. Oh, he's had a hard day. You don't look so good yourself, fella. Mind telling me what the hell you're doing down here with no legs?
Well, I came down here some time ago, looking for a bag of beans. Damn cat ran under my feet, and I tripped on him and wedged myself in here. Think it was shitballs, that little bastard. Tried everything I could to get out, but there's just no way. I've been down here for, I don't even know, Sheriff. Must be months.
Well, that can't be, Mr. McAllen. If it were months, you'd surely have starved to death.
I screamed for days, Sheriff. But the old gal can't hear her ass from her elbow. So, after I got done with the beans, I started in on my legs. Ate those, ate 2 cats, a couple silverfish, no salt or pepper. I'm in poorly shape, Sheriff. Think you can yank my ass out of here?
I was still staring at the fella's legs. He was sitting in a pile of shit and maggots, just dangling rotten meat like a month-old turkey carcass. He was wiggling around his upper legs like an excited kid in a big chair. It was no mystery anymore what stunk so bad. McAllen was rotten alive down here. Aside from that, he seemed in pretty good spirits, all things considered. I'm not sure I want to go yanking on you in your condition, Mr. McAllen.
Well, now you sound like my wife, Sheriff. Here, just grab my arm, will you?
He reached out a hand that looked like it hadn't been washed in quite a while. Also looked like it had been used to pull apart cats and legs and whatever else, and not so much as a handy wipe. Deputy, give Mr. McAllen a hand, would you?
Not feeling so good, Sheriff.
His eyes were just about swollen shut now, and his neck looked like a weird pull toy. I wondered if he was going to make it back up the stairs.
Never mind him, Sheriff. You can do it. Just grab my arm there and pull me out. I got no leverage on my own.
Well, so much for administrative work. You know, if there's one thing I've learned in all my years of law enforcement, it's this. You want something done, sometimes it's best to do it yourself. I grabbed Mr. McAllen around the wrist and pulled. He was in there pretty good, I thought. By the size of him, he couldn't have weighed more than $140, probably less without his legs. But once his torso squeezed out from between the water tank and the wall, you could hear the Velcro sound of his ass glued to the floor. I spaced my feet apart and gave him another good yank. The dried shit and whatever else peeled off the cement like an overcooked meal. He was groaning and cursing, but being a good sport about it. Better than Dingle, anyway. Another good pull, and I had him free. His legs weren't much help to him, though, and he kind of tipped over and landed on his face. I thought I might have dislocated his shoulder.
Eureka!
McAllen said into an old carpet remnant. Then he kind of flopped around like a warping fish.
Can you get me upright, fellas?
Dingle. I snapped my fingers in front of his face. You with me?
Oh, Bessie needs milking.
Dingle! I gave him a smack across the face. Not too hard, just enough to bring him back to his senses. He spun around a few times, but when he came back to face me, there was a little more life in his eyes.
What's that, Sheriff?
Grab Mr. McAllen's stumps there for me. Let's get him up the stairs.
Lord help me's dignity.
I could hear Mrs. McAllen upstairs messing around in the kitchen. All these weeks or months or however long, completely unaware of the horror under her feet. And this poor fella, forced all this time to listen to her bake cookies while he was down here nibbling on his leg meat.
Lardass, get out of the sink.
You know, once in a while, a man in my position just has to pause and try to make sense of it all. Life can indeed be cruel. That all these years I've been saddled with my great commission, and the woman I love is off gallivanting. And here we are, McAllen and me both, just surviving off our own resources, rotting away. One day I was going to do something about that, I decided. One day when the scales of justice were plumb level and the legions of darkness were finally brought to heel. One day I was going to strike a blow for all the sheriff balls of this world. I wasn't sure when, and I wasn't sure how. All I knew was one day I was going to do something. Dingle, after deliberating how to get Mr. McAllen's stumps under his arms, did just that. I got him under the armpits and we walked him up the staircase. Whatever mess was caked in Mr. McAllen's undercarriage was right under Dingle's face, and I'll bet he was pleased for the moment his nose didn't work. Didn't keep him from barfing a little on Wesley's lap, but all in all, he didn't smell any worse for it. We backed out of the doorway and stood in the missus's kitchen, waiting for her to notice. A few cats watched us wide-eyed, then made a beeline for the living room. Lardass wobbled in the sink, but ultimately stayed there.
Agnes, damn it!
She startled when she saw us, and her cookie sheet fell in a litter box.
Wesley, where the hell have you been? Where'd your legs go?
Well, it's a long story.
What's that?
Said it's a long story.
I'd like to know just how long that was, I said, even though I figured it didn't really matter. If there's one thing I've learned all these years, it has to be this. All's well that ends well.
You got the beans? Last I remember, you were supposed to bring up the beans. You been whoring again? Where the hell'd your legs go?
I ate the damn beans, Agnes. Plus 2 cats. And my legs.
You ate the cats? You sick bastard? Which ones?
No tail and motherfucker, I think.
Well, fuck me. Why didn't you call me?
I did call you. You didn't hear me.
What's that now?
A great sigh left Mr. McAllen, and he suddenly seemed less relieved than he had just a minute ago.
Sheriff, I changed my mind. Maybe just put me back down in the cellar. I'll get by.
Said you want pie?
Why would you want to do that, Mr. McAllen? Besides, I think you need some medical attention here. Those legs of yours are a bit outside the Band-Aid territory.
Sheriff, I've been down there so long, I forgot what I was missing. But now that you brought me back up here, now I remember. Nothing. That's what I've been missing. Nothing. You know what it's like living with a woman who can't even hear you. Having to say everything twice.
Say again, Wesley.
I hate it up here, Sheriff. I hate cats. I hate my wife. I hate the sun and the moon and the stars.
Oh, just plop him down somewhere, Sheriff. I'll make cookies. Let me just get the flour out. Asshat, get!
I'm too old to go a-whoring. Too poor to go a-drinking. No good news on the radio. Nothing worth watching on TV. Nothing to eat without cat hair in it. And God help you if you eat those cookies. I had it, Sheriff. In fact, now I think about it, these past weeks or months or however long have been pretty darn relaxing. Just put me back where you found me, Sheriff. Throw down a few boxes of macaroni. I'll be okay.
Well, goddamn, I said. 'Tis an unweeded garden indeed.
Unit 1. Come in, Unit 1.
What is it, Frankie?
More calls about the McAllen house. Requesting an update, sir.
Oh, right. Well, I tell you, Frankie, the deputy and I were just there having some lemonade and cookies, and I'll tell you what, just the cleanest, freshest little house I've ever set foot in. I suggest you tell anyone complaining to go check their upper lip, 'cause there might be some shit on it. That's Matthew 7:5, Frankie. Wipe the shit off thine own lip before you go wasting police resources. Do you copy, dispatch?
Copy that, Sheriff.
I hung the radio back on my underwear strap and brushed the cat hair off my cheek. I wasn't so greasy anymore as I was dusty and hairy. The car was going to need a cleaning. As soon as Dingle's swelling went down a bit, I'd have him right on it. How you holding up there, deputy? Fresh air doing you good?
I think the stink's stuck in my nose, Sheriff. I may never get rid of it.
Oh, just you hold on a second, Dingle. I say there's never been a better time to fart than I let him have just then. I even rolled up the window to make sure he got all of it. How's that, deputy? You know, if there's one thing I've learned all these years working together, it's got to be this. Every little problem has a fix. May not always be what you expected it to be. May not always be pretty either. But you and me, pal, we always come out smelling like daisies. Ain't that right, Dingle? Ain't that just as right can get? Dingle? Dingle? Well, the deputy seemed to have lost consciousness just then. Or maybe he was just sleeping. I don't know. It'd been a big day for the both of us, and that's the gospel truth. Speaking of which, you'd no sooner catch me arguing with Matthew than you would my fair dispatcher. Nor would you catch me arguing with John, Paul, or Ringo. Because if there's one more thing I've learned in all my years, it's got to be this. Everyone's gospel is going to be a little bit different. One fella's going to see this, one fella's going to see that. This one's going to smell cookies, that one's going to smell necrotic flesh. Doesn't mean anyone's right or wrong, only that the truth is somewhere in the middle. See, the scales of justice are supposed to wobble a bit, and there's a good reason that lady holding them wears a blindfold. Sometimes you just gotta hold your nose, turn away, and let people do what they're gonna do. About all you can do for yourself is heed the time-honored words of your mama. Always put on clean drawers in the morning. Whatever decisions you make after that, well, it's not always gonna be a good one or a bad one. Sometimes you just gotta go through the motions. Eventually, I guess you just gotta give up. In the case of Mr. McAllen, I guess he had finally found Byzantium. Who was I to turn him around? I got a few odd looks at Splittail tacos and dry cleaning, but Dingle was still unconscious, so I had to go in by myself. What are clothes anyway but a micrometer-thin facade of dignity? A lot of good they did Dingle. So, with the Baron, which only a great luminary can carry himself, I ordered 5 crunchy tacos and an orange Fanta. I sat eating and thought to myself, maybe one of these days I'll drive up to Schenectady and see what's what. Maybe I'd trim my mustache up to my upper lip and get a fancy haircut and a pair of loafers, and maybe even a nice suit. Maybe I'd trade my gun in for a handheld video game and learn on the internet about ciabatta loaves and panini makers and coffee-flavored beer and fancy teas. Maybe. And maybe Mr. McAllen will grow his legs back, because a guy like me, I've been walking the lonely street of dreams all my life, and I've learned quite a few things along the way. I know I don't bring them up very often, but believe me, I have. And if there's one thing I've learned most of all, it's this. People don't change. Hell, if you were anything like me, why would you want to?
Chilling tales for dark nights.